Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was driving from Kingman, Arizona to Barstow one night in late August. It was close to midnight, and I'd been on the road for hours already. The desert was empty. No other cars, no towns for miles, just open space and heat still rising off the asphalt even after dark. Had the windows down, radio low, cruise control on. The sky was clear, one of those nights where the stars look close enough to touch. I was supposed to be in Barstow by 1 or 2, depending on how many times I stopped. I'd done this route plenty before. I work maintenance for a solar contractor, and sometimes I have to check on panels out near Needles or Mojave, so I know the stretch of I-40 pretty well. I've seen all kinds of weird stuff out there. Heat mirages, old billboards lit by nothing, even a stray pack of dogs once. But this was different. Around midnight, maybe a little after, my dashboard lights started flickering. The speedometer needle twitched, then the radio cut out mid-song. I thought it was just the battery connection or maybe the alternator. I tapped the dash like an idiot, but everything went dark. Headlights, gauges, AC, all of it. Even the engine. No sputter, no warning, just dead. I coasted onto the shoulder, steering as best I could with no power. When I stopped, the silence hit me. You don't realize how much noise a running car makes until it stops completely. No hum, no fan, not even the click of the cooling engine. Just the wind moving through the desert. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. No lights, no sound, not even the ding from the keys. I popped the hood, grabbed my flashlight from the glove box, and got out. The air was still warm, but it had that dry bite to it. Sand crunched under my boots. I lifted the hood. Everything looked normal. No smell of burning, no smoke, no loose wires I could see. I stood there for a minute, just listening. Then I noticed how quiet it was. Not normal desert quiet either. No insects, no wind, no distant semis, just dead air, the kind that presses on your ears. My flashlight beam felt small against all that emptiness. I kept expecting to hear a coyote or something, but there was nothing. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was headlights cresting a hill in the distance, but it wasn't coming from the ground. It was a white light, bright but not blinding. Gliding over the highway, maybe a quarter mile ahead, completely silent. It didn't pulse or flash, just moved smooth and steady across the road, like it was scanning it. My first thought was a drone, but it was too big, too fluid. There were no red or green navigation lights, no buzz of rotors. It was just floating. I froze behind the hood, watching. The light didn't seem to notice me or my car. It moved from left to right across the asphalt, then paused over the center of the road. The desert around it lit up pale white, the kind of light that makes everything lose its shadows. The sand, the sagebrush, even the guardrail, all looked flat, like the light wasn't coming from above, but from everywhere at once. Then it stopped moving completely. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe 10 seconds, maybe a minute. My flashlight flickered once, even though the batteries were new. Then, without any sound, the white light shot straight up. Not like a flare or a rocket, no trail, no acceleration curve. Just gone. 1 second it was hovering over the road, and the next it was a pinprick in the sky blending with the stars. Everything was dark again. I lowered the hood and got back in the car, heartbeat loud in my ears. I tried the key again, expecting nothing, but the dashboard lights came on immediately. Radio kicked back in mid-sentence, AC blasting. The engine turned over like nothing had happened. I just sat there for a minute, gripping the wheel. I looked at my phone, and the clock read 12:43 a.m. I couldn't remember what time it had been when the car died. It felt like maybe 5 minutes had passed, but I wasn't sure. I turned the radio down, put it in drive, and eased back onto the highway. A few miles later, I started noticing other strange things. My GPS kept losing signal, flipping between coordinates that didn't make sense. My phone screen glitched out twice. Just white static, no text, then went back to normal. The temperature gauge on the dash stayed stuck for 10 minutes before dropping suddenly to normal levels. I told myself it was all just fallout from whatever electrical issue I'd had. Then I saw the same light again. way out over the desert to my right. Farther this time, just above the horizon. It wasn't moving, just hanging there. I slowed down, half expecting it to be a plane lining up for landing somewhere distant, but there were no airports anywhere nearby. The light brightened for a second, then dimmed until it vanished completely. I didn't stop again. When I finally reached the next gas station, I pulled in and parked under the lights. There were 2 other cars there, truckers mostly, and I felt stupid even thinking about what I'd seen. I went inside, grabbed a soda, and asked the clerk if the power had flickered recently. She looked at me weird and said no, not that she knew of. I told her my car had shut off for a few minutes back on 40, and she shrugged, said maybe it was the heat. I checked under the hood again before leaving. Everything still looked fine. Battery terminals were tight, no corrosion, no leaks. My flashlight worked perfectly again, no flicker this time. The whole thing made less and less sense the more I thought about it. I made it to Barstow around 2:30, checked into a cheap motel, parked right outside the window. I left the blinds half open so I could see the car. Around 4 in the morning, I woke up for no reason. The room was quiet, air conditioner humming, everything normal. I looked outside, the car was there, untouched. But in the distance, beyond the highway lights, I saw a faint white glow low on the horizon. Not moving, just sitting there. Could have been a distant plane or some kind of tower. I watched it until my eyes watered and then it faded out. I went back to bed and didn't drive that route again for months. When I finally did, in daylight, I pulled over around where it had happened. I thought maybe I'd find something. Tire marks, a piece of debris, anything. But there was nothing. Just the same cracked asphalt, the same guardrail, the same silence. Even the air felt heavy again when I stood there, like sound didn't carry right. I've had the car checked since then, twice. Mechanics say everything's perfect. Alternator, battery, wiring, all clean. They looked at me funny when I tried to explain how everything had just shut off. I stopped trying to explain after that. Sometimes late at night, when I drive through quieter stretches of desert, I still turn off the radio just to listen. Not for the hum of the road or the wind, but for that silence, that total suffocating stillness that feels too big to belong to you. And once or twice, out of the corner of my eye, I've caught a white flicker over the edge of the horizon, always there for half a second longer than it should be. I woke up to my phone buzzing on the nightstand, but when I grabbed it, the screen was just flashing 3:33 a.m. over and over. Not the lock screen, not a notification, just the time blinking. I sat up, squinting at it, thinking maybe it was frozen. Then I noticed the microwave light from the kitchen doing the same thing. 3:33, blinking in perfect rhythm. The stove clock, too. Even the old digital alarm clock on my dresser, which usually runs a minute slow, was synced exactly. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe we'd had a power surge or something, but the ceiling fan was still spinning, and my bedside lamp worked fine. I checked my phone again. No service, no Wi-Fi, just 3:33. The weirdest part was the light coming through my blinds. It wasn't moonlight. It was too bright, too even. A soft, pale blue glow that filled the whole room like a dim aquarium. I thought maybe someone had parked outside with their headlights on, but when I peeked through the blinds, the street was empty. The glow wasn't coming from anywhere specific. It was just in the air. The sky itself looked wrong. No moon, no stars, just a flat wash of cold blue that made everything look two-dimensional. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a small building in Tacoma. Nothing fancy, thin walls, flickering hallway lights, old windows that rattle in the wind. My roommate Sam was out of town for work, so it was just me that night. I remember thinking how quiet the whole building felt. Usually at that hour I'd hear at least one car on the street or someone's TV downstairs, but there was nothing, not even the hum of the refrigerator. I stepped into the living room, and every device I owned, the cable box, the coffee maker, the thermostat, was flashing 3:33, perfectly in sync. It was like the whole apartment had been frozen in that exact moment. I went to the window facing the parking lot. The sky was glowing evenly, like someone had replaced the night with a massive backlight. The trees looked almost transparent against it. The street lamps were off. I could see the outlines of the other apartment buildings across the lot, but all their windows were dark. Not one light on. That's when I noticed something else. The air felt heavy, like before a thunderstorm, except it wasn't hot or humid. It was still, perfectly still. My skin prickled like static. I remember whispering, "What the hell?" to myself, just to break the silence. My voice sounded small and muffled, like I was speaking underwater. I went back to the kitchen to check the breaker box, thinking maybe this was some electrical glitch. The digital display on my toaster was blinking 3:33:2, which didn't even make sense. I didn't know it had a clock. I opened the fridge. The light was off, but the milk inside felt cold. I waved my hand in front of the motion sensor light over the sink. Nothing. Then I noticed the hum. At first, I thought it was coming from the fridge motor trying to kick back on, but it wasn't mechanical. It was low and steady, almost like a vibration more than a sound. I felt it in my chest, faint but constant. It didn't change pitch, didn't pulse, just sat there, buried under everything. I went to the balcony door and slid it open. The sound got a little louder, but the air outside was just as still. The blue light made the parking lot look like a photograph. Sharp, frozen, unreal. Not a leaf moved. I leaned on the railing and looked up, trying to find the source of the glow, but the sky was just a blank sheet of color. And then, out of nowhere, all the power cut. The apartment went completely black. No lights, no hum, no 333 flashing, just silence. I stood there, waiting for my eyes to adjust, but the sky wasn't blue anymore. It was black, the normal kind of black, with faint clouds drifting. I could see 1 or 2 stars. I checked my phone again. It rebooted itself, showing 3:34 a.m. The Wi-Fi icon flickered back on. A text from Sam came through, time-stamped 11:18 p.m., asking if I'd locked the back door before he left. I exhaled and turned on the kitchen light. Everything powered up normally. The stove clock read 3:35. Microwave 2. The fridge motor hummed back to life. The 3:33 blinking had stopped completely. I didn't sleep after that. In the morning, I went downstairs to get coffee from the gas station next door. The sky was its usual gray, a few seagulls fighting over trash in the lot. I asked the clerk if the power had gone out overnight, and he said no, not that he'd noticed. The guy lives in the same building, 2 floors below me. Said his phone alarm went off fine at 6 like always. When I got back upstairs, everything looked normal again. I made breakfast, checked my phone, battery life fine, time accurate. But when I went to turn on the TV, the input menu flashed up with a frozen blue screen that stayed for a few seconds before it switched to normal. The same color as the sky had been. That night, I tried not to think about it. I turned on all the lights, put on a movie, even opened the blinds to let in the streetlight glow. Around midnight, the neighbor's dog started barking nonstop. Not frantic, just steady, like it was barking at something it couldn't see. It went on for almost 10 minutes before stopping all at once. Around 2, I gave up on sleep and scrolled through my phone. Randomly, I checked the camera roll. The last photo I'd taken, a picture of my dinner the previous evening, was time-stamped 3:33 a.m. I didn't take that picture. It was just a shot of my living room. Lights off, the balcony door slightly open, everything tinted faint blue. I don't even remember standing there. I went out onto the balcony again just to look, half expecting to see the glow come back. But it was dark, quiet, normal. Cars passed on the street, a plane blinked overhead, nothing unusual. I shut the door, locked it, and sat down on the couch. After a few minutes, the microwave beeped from the kitchen. I checked. No timer set, no buttons pressed. Just 3:33 flashing again. The next day, I unplugged everything with a clock in it. Phone, TV, microwave, all of it. It didn't make a difference. The apartment still felt wrong, like the air inside was thicker than outside. A week later, Sam came home. I told him everything. He laughed at first. Thought I'd been dreaming. Then he stopped laughing when I showed him the picture on my phone. He scrolled through, checked the metadata. It really was taken at 3:33 a.m. He didn't have much to say after that. That night, he crashed on the couch. Around 3:30, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Slow, even. I waited for the sound of a door opening or closing, but it never came. I peeked through the peephole. The hallway lights were on, but empty. When I turned around, Sam was sitting up on the couch looking toward the balcony door. He said, "Do you see that?" Through the blinds, the faintest blue light was pulsing against the glass. Not strong this time, just enough to wash over the floor in steady intervals like something hovering far away. Neither of us moved for a long time. Then the light faded, the pulse slowed, and everything went dark again. The next morning, the clocks all showed the right time, 7:48 a.m. Sunlight poured through the windows. No blue, no glow. Sam didn't say a word before leaving for work. He moved out 3 weeks later. Said his new place in Puyallup was better for his commute. Sometimes, if I wake up in the middle of the night, I check my phone before anything else. If it says 3:33, I don't look outside. It was a Wednesday night, sometime around 2 in the morning. I was halfway through my shift at a distribution warehouse outside of Lubbock, Texas. The place was dead quiet by then, only 2 trucks scheduled after midnight, and both had already come and gone. I worked security for the company, mostly boring stuff. Watching cameras, checking the gates, making sure nobody came in to mess with the shipments. The building itself was massive, like 2 football fields long, surrounded by flat dirt lots and chain link fencing. No nearby houses, no businesses, just empty land and power lines stretching into nothing. It was one of those nights where the air feels thick even though it's cool out, the kind that makes the fluorescent lights hum louder than usual. I was sitting in the monitoring room, drinking coffee and watching the feeds. We had 16 cameras covering every angle, docks, perimeter fence, parking lot, rooftop, all in grainy black and white. The feed for camera 7, which pointed toward the north loading bay, flickered once. Not unusual, that one had been glitchy since last winter. But then I noticed a faint light in the top corner of the frame, above the building. At first I figured it was the reflection of a plane or maybe one of those tower beacons, but it wasn't blinking. It was just hanging there, steady, white, and low. I leaned closer to the monitor. It wasn't shaped like a plane light either. It was round, almost too perfect. No edges, no glare, just this quiet glow like a drop of white paint in the sky. The weird part was how low it looked, maybe 100 feet above the warehouse roof, if that. I waited for it to move, but it didn't. It just stayed in the same spot, motionless. After about a minute, I switched between cameras, trying to catch it from a different angle. Cameras 3 and 9 covered parts of the roofline too, and the light showed up in both, same place, same distance. That's when it hit me that it wasn't some glitch in the feed. I grabbed my flashlight and the keys and went out the side door. The night was dead still. Even the cicadas were quiet. The sky was overcast, no stars, no wind. The parking lot lights made everything look flat and washed out. I stepped out past the loading bays and looked up. Nothing, just dull gray clouds. I waited a few seconds, then looked back toward the cameras above the door. Red indicator lights still blinking. Everything seemed normal. I turned my radio on, thinking about calling the second guard on duty, but he was out doing rounds by the south fence, almost half a mile away. I figured I'd check the roof myself. We had a maintenance stairwell up the back, so I started toward it. My boots echoed against the concrete. Halfway there, the air changed. That's the only way I can describe it. Like a sudden drop in pressure. My ears popped. The sound of the generator humming behind the building cut out completely, replaced by this faint, low vibration. Not loud, but steady, like a subwoofer playing through the ground. I stopped walking and looked up again. There it was, directly above the roof, maybe 50 feet up this time. Same white glow, perfectly round. No movement, no sound, no edges, just hovering. My flashlight flickered once and went out. I smacked it against my hand, but it stayed dead. I checked my phone, no signal. The time still said 2:11 a.m. I stood there staring for maybe 10 seconds, then started backing toward the door. Right as I reached for the handle, the light dimmed. Not like it flew away, more like someone turned a dial down slowly until it just melted into the clouds. The instant it disappeared, the generator kicked back on. My ears popped again. Everything sounded normal. I went back inside fast. When I got to the monitor room, I froze. Every camera feed was black. Not fuzzy, not static, just total darkness. The timestamps were frozen at 2:12:04 a.m. I tried rebooting the system, thinking maybe the power had glitched, but the main screen wouldn't respond. 3 minutes later, exactly 3 minutes, I timed it. Every feed came back online at once. The timestamps jumped from 2:12:04 to 2:15:05. I replayed the footage. All 16 cameras just cut to black at the exact same moment, then resumed like nothing had happened. No signs of interference before or after. The light I'd seen above the roof didn't show up on any footage past that point. I called my supervisor, woke him up, told him the system had frozen. He said to save the logs and fill out an incident report, standard procedure. I didn't mention the light. I didn't even know how to explain it. The next morning, one of the tech guys came in to check the DVR. He pulled the data logs and said the blackout wasn't caused by power loss or network drop. It was like the cameras had been told to stop recording at exactly the same time. Manual trigger? I asked. He shook his head. If it was manual, it'd show up as a command. This looks like nothing happened. I didn't know what to say. He just shrugged, said he'd reinstall the firmware, and left it at that. Later that day, I went outside where I'd seen the light. There was a faint scorch mark on the gravel, about 6 feet wide, right beside the maintenance stairwell. Not black, just a circle of darker, dry rock. I touched it, warm, even though it was mid-afternoon. When I told the other guard, Luis, about it, he said he hadn't seen or heard anything unusual, but he did mention something odd from earlier that night. Around 2:10 a.m., his radio had gone silent. Said he'd tried to check in with me, but all he got was static for a few minutes before it cleared up. I asked if his watch had the right time. He said, yeah, 2:15 when the static stopped. For the next few shifts, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The cameras were fine, no glitches, but I started noticing small things. The security lights along the fence would dim slightly at random, like something was blocking them. The air around the North Bay smelled faintly metallic. One night, a week after it happened, I went out for my usual round around 2 a.m. When I passed the loading bays, my radio hissed again, that same faint static. Then I heard what sounded like feedback from an open mic, followed by a quick pop, like when you unplug headphones. I looked up toward the roof and saw a pale reflection slide across the metal, like something moving above it without a sound. I didn't check the cameras that time. A few nights later, I was outside on a smoke break when I caught another glimpse, not of the light itself, but of its reflection on the hood of my truck. The glow rippled like heat rising off asphalt. When I turned around, the sky looked normal, but the reflection stayed for a few seconds before fading out. It's been months now, and the system logs still show that 3-minute gap from 2:12 to 2:15 a.m. The tech guys can't explain it. They said it wasn't a power issue, not lightning, not a reboot. Just no data. Sometimes when I'm sitting in the monitoring room, the north camera feed flickers for half a second, just long enough to make me glance up. The first few times I told myself it was wind or interference. But every time it happens, the timestamp lands somewhere between 2:11 and 2:15. I don't go outside during those minutes anymore. Whatever happened that night, the cameras didn't just fail, they went blind, and whatever was above the warehouse, it was real enough that it didn't want to be seen. I was staying at a friend's rental in Lincoln City, Oregon. It was early May, still cold enough that the nights had that damp chill that sticks to your clothes. The house was up on a bluff about a quarter mile from the water. You could see the ocean through the living room window during the day, but at night it was just blackness with the faint white smear of waves catching light from the porch. It was around midnight. My friend Claire had gone to bed. I couldn't sleep. I never do well the first night in a new place. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling on my phone, half watching some show muted on the TV. The only light in the room came from the screen and the dim glow from the microwave clock in the kitchen. That's when it happened. There was a sudden flash outside. Pure white, not yellow like lightning. It filled the whole window for maybe half a second. The light hit everything evenly, no shadows, no thunder after. I froze, waiting for the rumble, but nothing came. Just silence, and that faint ocean hush. I figured it was a transformer blowing, or maybe a camera flash from someone taking pictures on the beach, though it looked way too bright for that. I stood up and went to the window. Over the water, about a mile out, there was a narrow column of light coming down from the sky. It wasn't flickering like a searchlight. It was perfectly still, almost solid looking, like a beam frozen in place. The ocean below it, glowed faintly where it touched, this pale reflection spreading outward in a perfect circle. I remember thinking it looked artificial, but not like anything I'd seen before. I watched for maybe a full minute, expecting it to fade or move, but it didn't. The light stayed fixed, straight down to the water. No sound, no movement. The weirdest part was how defined it was, not diffused, not spreading. Just this single column, bright enough that my eyes started to ache. After a while, I grabbed my jacket and stepped out onto the deck. The air was colder than I expected, damp with sea mist. I could smell the salt, but it was faint, like the air itself wasn't moving much. The light was still there. I could see it clearly through the fog. Not quite white anymore, maybe a soft blue at the edges. I stood there a few seconds, debating whether to wake Claire, but something about the stillness made me keep quiet. The whole night felt wrong. The wind had died completely, and the usual distant crashing of waves sounded muffled, almost like I had earplugs in. I decided to walk down to the beach. The access trail was about 2 blocks away, a narrow path between 2 rental houses. I kept expecting to hear cars from the highway or someone else outside, but there was nothing. No sound but my shoes on the wet pavement. When I got to the trail, I could see the light clearly even through the trees. That same vertical beam reaching from the sky to the horizon. It looked closer now, maybe half a mile out. The sand was damp and cold underfoot when I stepped onto the beach. I could see the light reflecting off the wet sand, sharp and white. But the strangest thing, the ocean was completely still. No movement at all. I mean that literally. The waves had stopped mid-motion, like someone had paused them. The waterline was perfectly even, not receding or advancing. The foam along the edge sat there, unmoving. The reflection of the light shimmered faintly on the surface, but the water itself didn't move. I walked closer, maybe 20 or 30 feet from the edge, just staring. My brain kept trying to fill in explanations, some optical illusion, some weird calm patch of water, but it didn't make sense. The tide in this area is constant. You can't just have it go still like that. The beam stayed steady. I tried to see where it came from, but I couldn't. It didn't look like it started in the clouds. It was just there, hanging from nothing. I took out my phone and tried recording, but the camera wouldn't focus. The screen showed nothing but darkness. I tried again with a photo, and when the flash went off, the entire beam vanished for a split second, just gone, and then came back as the flash faded. I felt my stomach drop. That tiny, impossible reaction from the light made it feel like it was aware of being seen. I stepped back. The sand felt soft, unsteady under my boots, like standing on a trampoline. I thought maybe it was just the tide shifting, but the water still hadn't moved. Then I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, like burnt ozone or hot metal. It grew stronger the longer I stood there, mixed with something earthy. Not rotting, but old, like wet stone or something pulled from deep underground. I backed up toward the dunes. I can't explain why, but I had this instinct that I shouldn't stand in the open. I crouched behind a driftwood log and kept watching. After maybe another minute, the light changed color. The base touching the water started glowing pale green. Then the whole column pulsed once, like a slow heartbeat. The reflection on the water rippled outward, and that's when the waves suddenly came back. The entire ocean seemed to inhale. The first wave rolled forward fast, crashing hard against the shore like a released breath. The sound hit me so abruptly it made my ears ring. Then everything was back. The wind, the normal night sounds, the surf pounding like it always does. The light was gone. I stayed crouched there for a long time, watching the horizon. Nothing else happened, just the regular dark ocean. When I finally stood up, I noticed something else. My phone's clock said 12:47. I checked it when I left the house. It had been 12:08. The walk down takes maybe 5 minutes each way, and I couldn't have stood there more than 10 or 15 minutes, but somehow 40 minutes had passed. Back at the house, the lights inside were off. I thought Claire might have woken up, but she was still asleep when I peeked into her room. The microwave clock showed 12:48, same as my phone. I went back to the window just to see if it was really gone. The horizon was dark. The water looked normal again, the usual rolling motion. But there was something odd about the color. The foam near the shore glowed faintly, like someone had poured bleach into it. By morning, it was gone too. When I told Claire what happened, she laughed at first, said I probably saw a fishing boat's spotlight through the fog. But later, when we walked down to the beach after breakfast, she stopped about halfway down the trail and said, "What's that smell?" It was still faintly there, that metallic electric tang. We looked around the sand, and about 50 feet from the waterline, there was a long, shallow mark, like something had been pressed into the beach. Not a tire track or a trench, more like the sand had been compacted into a perfect arc, maybe 30 feet wide, curved like a slice of a circle. We stood there a while, trying to figure it out. Then she shrugged and said it was probably something the tide did overnight. I nodded, even though I knew the tide doesn't make shapes like that. That night, I sat up again around midnight. The sky was cloudy, no stars, just dark gray stretching forever. I turned off the porch light and watched the water. Nothing happened, but I kept watching, and around 12:13, I noticed something faint. Not a light this time, but a small shimmer, way out past the horizon line. Like heat rising off asphalt, except it was over the water. It flickered once, then disappeared. I stayed there until 1, waiting, listening to the waves crash normally against the rocks below. Everything felt ordinary again, except for one thing. When the wind shifted off the ocean, it carried that faint metallic scent back with it. It was late July, somewhere around 9 at night, and the rain had been coming down for hours. I was driving back from a work site outside of Asheville, trying to make it home before midnight. The weather had turned nasty fast. Heavy wind, sheets of rain slamming the windshield, thunder that rattled the steering column. The kind of storm that makes you lean forward in your seat without realizing it. I was on a stretch of Highway 64 that cuts through forest and farmland. Hardly any other cars. I could see flashes of lightning every few seconds through the trees, lighting up the clouds in pale blue bursts. The radio had cut out about 20 minutes earlier, just static now. My phone had no signal either, which wasn't unusual out there. When the first weird thing happened, I didn't even realize it was weird. I came around a bend and saw this faint glow behind the clouds ahead. Not lightning, more like a dull white light spreading across one section of the sky. It was too steady to be lightning, too bright to be a plane. I figured it might be some power line sparking or a transformer blowing up from the storm, but it was in the wrong place, too high up. I slowed down a bit and turned the wipers up. The rain was thick enough that the road looked like black glass. Then a huge bolt of lightning flashed across the clouds, and for half a second it lit up something sitting behind them. I don't know how to describe it exactly. It looked metallic, like brushed steel or aluminum, and massive, bigger than any aircraft I've ever seen. Not shaped like a plane either, more like the curved edge of something round or disc-shaped, but I could only see part of it through the clouds. It was just there, motionless, sitting behind the storm. The light faded instantly after the flash, leaving me staring at the dark sky, trying to process what I'd just seen. My first thought was that my eyes had played tricks on me, like when lightning hits and you get those burned-in after images. But the shape had been too clear, too structured. It had depth, shadows. I kept driving, scanning the clouds. A few seconds later, another flash lit up the same area, and there was nothing there. Just clouds swirling from the wind. I gripped the wheel harder, trying to convince myself it was just the angle, or maybe the lightning hitting from a weird direction. But the more I thought about it, the less it felt like that. Then I realized the rain had stopped. Not gradually, it was like someone flipped a switch. 1 second it was hammering the roof, the next it was completely silent. The wipers squeaked across a dry windshield, even though the sky was still black and full of storm clouds. I slowed almost to a stop and looked around. No sound, no rain. The trees weren't even moving anymore. The silence was heavy, like the air itself had thickened. I rolled the window down a little, expecting to hear insects or the wind, but there was nothing. I sat there for maybe 20 seconds, waiting for the storm to start again. The clouds above were still flashing, silent lightning flickering deep inside them, but no thunder followed. The light just kept pulsing, soft, rhythmic. And then it happened again. A huge flash, bright enough to make me flinch. And in that half second, I saw it clearly this time. The same metallic surface, only closer, or maybe just more exposed. It filled the whole section of sky, blotting out the storm clouds behind it. Perfectly smooth, curved, and massive. I could see where the lightning reflected off it, highlighting edges that didn't make sense, angles that curved in on themselves, like a structure that shouldn't exist. When the light faded, everything went black again. I put the car in park and just stared up at where it had been. My breathing sounded too loud inside the cabin. I remember thinking, in this weird detached way, that I should take a picture. But I didn't move. A low rumble rolled across the fields, not thunder, something deeper, slower, like a heavy engine idling miles away. It seemed to vibrate through the car, more felt than heard. I leaned out the window, trying to pinpoint the direction, but it wasn't coming from anywhere specific. It was everywhere at once. Then the power went out. Every light on my dashboard flickered and died. The headlights dimmed to black. Even the digital clock went blank. The engine was still running, but there was no sound, no hum, no vibration, nothing. It was like the world had frozen around me. I tried hitting the gas. Nothing. The pedal felt dead. I sat there in the dark with my hands on the wheel, the faint lightning flashes still pulsing somewhere above. That went on for maybe a minute. Hard to say exactly. Time felt off. Then, without warning, everything came back. The engine roared, the headlights flared on, the rain started again in one hard sheet. The sound of it hitting the car was almost deafening after that silence. I hit the brakes, heart pounding, and just sat there, letting the wipers clear the windshield. I looked up again, searching for that light or shape, but the sky was just storm clouds now. Lightning flashed again, and all I saw was rain. I drove the rest of the way home doing maybe 20 under the limit. Every flash of lightning made me tense, expecting to see it again, but there was nothing. When I got home around midnight, the power was out in my neighborhood too. The street was dark, just the sound of rain and wind. My phone still showed no signal. I parked and sat there a minute, trying to calm down. The dashboard clock read 12:06. That didn't make sense. I'd left the site around 8:40. The drive should have taken a little over an hour, maybe 90 minutes with the storm. I checked my phone, same time. I hadn't stopped more than a couple minutes total. I couldn't figure out where the missing time went. When the power came back around 2, I went outside. The rain had stopped again, and the air smelled sharp, almost metallic. The clouds were breaking apart, moving fast. I could see stars between them, but there was this one patch of sky, right where the thing had been. Perfectly clear, no clouds, no stars, just black, like a hole in the night. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes watching it. Then, without realizing why, I stepped backward until I was under the porch roof. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still up there, unseen. The next day, I checked the news, weather reports, even local forums. They said a few people reported seeing strange lights near the highway that night, but most of it got brushed off as lightning anomalies. No mention of anything metallic or any power outages in that specific stretch. I drove that road again a week later, just to see it in daylight. There was nothing unusual, same trees, same fields. But when I reached the bend where I'd seen it, the radio cut out again for a few seconds. Static, then back to normal. I didn't mention that part to anyone. A month later, I was closing the shop one evening when a thunderstorm rolled in. The sky went that same deep gray color, and a flash lit up the horizon. For a split second, I thought I saw that same curved shape again, way out beyond the ridge. Then it was gone, and I told myself I'd imagined it. But sometimes, when the storms come in heavy like that, I'll step outside and look at the clouds, just for a second. And every time the lightning flashes, I half expect to see that metal surface sitting quietly behind it, waiting for the light to hit just right. I was hiking near the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in southern Colorado last fall, early October. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, cool air, the trees still holding some color. I'd gone up for a solo weekend trip, something I do a few times a year when I need to reset. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I've done enough hiking to know my limits. I just wanted a quiet couple of days away from my phone, away from work. I'd camped out near a small lake called Willow Creek Reservoir the night before. Slept well, woke up to frost on the tent, boiled coffee over the stove, all the usual stuff. Around 9, I packed up my day pack and headed up one of the ridge lines that looped toward the west. No one else had been on the trail that morning, at least not that I saw. It was quiet up there. The kind of quiet you only get in the high country. No cars, no voices, just the wind pushing through the grass. I'd been hiking about 2 hours when I stopped for a break near a clearing that looked down over the valley. That's when I pulled out my compass. I've had the same one for years. A Silva I keep clipped to my pack strap. I pulled it off to check direction before continuing toward what I thought was the western ridge. But the needle wasn't moving. At first, I thought maybe I was holding it wrong, or there was a metal buckle near it, throwing it off. I took it off the strap and held it out in front of me, turned my body slowly. Nothing. The needle just sat there, locked dead north. I tapped the glass. Still nothing. That was weird, but not impossible. I'd had compasses stick before, moisture, temperature, static, whatever. I set it down on a rock to see if maybe the problem was me moving. Still frozen. The air felt different too. I didn't notice it right away, but everything had gone strangely still. The wind stopped, even the bugs. It was like the whole mountain paused. I remember crouching down, trying to shake the compass again, and that's when I felt this faint vibration under my boots. It wasn't an earthquake, more like a slow, rolling pressure moving through the ground. Then, the sound started. It was this deep hum, so low it was almost below hearing range, more a feeling than a noise. It made my ribs buzz. Not painful, but uncomfortable, like standing next to a massive engine running behind a wall. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. I stood up fast, looking around. The air felt heavy, thick in my chest when I breathed. My first thought was a plane, maybe a military one flying too low or some kind of test. But when I looked up, the sky was clear. Not a single cloud, not even a contrail. The sound kept building, steady and slow. My ears popped like the air pressure was shifting. I turned in a full circle, trying to figure out what direction it was coming from, but it didn't have one. It was just there. My compass was still on the rock. The needle hadn't moved at all. After maybe 30 seconds, the vibration changed. It was like the sound started pulsing, evenly spaced. The ground trembled a little with each beat. My backpack straps buzzed against my chest. I took a few steps backward without meaning to, glancing toward the tree line. The birds came back all at once. A whole burst of them shot up out of the trees downhill, hundreds of them, all flying in the same direction like they'd been startled. I turned to watch them, and when I looked back up the ridge, I saw something strange in the sky. It was faint at first, like a shimmer of heat above the treetops, even though the air was cold. The light bent there, like looking through glass or oil on water. It wasn't moving, just hanging there, the outline barely visible if I didn't stare straight at it. The sound deepened again. My stomach dropped. The air around me felt charged, like before a lightning strike. My skin tingled, every hair on my arms standing up. Then it stopped. The hum cut off in an instant, and the silence after it was almost worse. My ears rang like I'd been to a concert. I realized I was holding my breath and exhaled. The birds were gone now, the forest dead quiet again. I waited there for a while, probably longer than I realized. The shimmer in the air faded slowly until there was nothing but blue sky. When I finally picked up my compass again, the needle snapped loose and spun wildly before settling back into place, pointing true north. It was working again like nothing had happened. I started hiking back down right after that. I didn't even eat the sandwich I'd packed. I just wanted to get lower, closer to camp, somewhere that didn't feel so off. The trail back felt longer than it should have. I checked my watch a few times, but it was hard to tell how much time had passed. When I finally got back to the lake, the sun was lower than I expected. It should have been around noon, maybe 1. My watch said 4:37. I remember standing there on the shoreline, looking across the water. The lake was perfectly still. No ripples, no wind. That's when I noticed the same faint vibration again, coming through my boots, just for a few seconds. I looked out at the water, and in the reflection of the mountains, I saw a flicker of light. Not from the sun, it was too low for that. It came from somewhere above and behind me. I turned around, but there was nothing in the sky, just the faintest hum again, almost too soft to notice. I stayed up most of that night in the tent, half expecting it to start again. It didn't. No sound, no vibration, no light, just regular wind and the sounds of the forest returning. The next morning, I hiked out early. When I got to my car at the trailhead, I checked my phone. The time was normal, but it showed a weird gap in my GPS track from the hike, like a section of the trail had no data for about an hour and a half. I didn't tell anyone right away. I didn't want to sound crazy. A couple of weeks later, though, I mentioned it to a guy named Rick who works in land management up there. He asked me where it happened. When I told him, he got this odd look and said, people sometimes report atmospheric anomalies on that ridge, compasses acting weird, GPS dropping out, barometers spiking for no reason. He said the official line was magnetic interference from mineral deposits, but the way he said it made me think he didn't believe that. I went back one more time a month later just to see it again. The snow had started to come in by then. I stood on the same ridge with my compass. It worked fine the whole time. No sounds, no humming, nothing unusual. On the hike back down, though, I felt it again, just barely. A faint vibration under the ground like the start of a far-off engine. It only lasted a second or two, but it was enough to make me stop walking. The wind picked up right after, and the feeling passed. When I got back to the trailhead, I checked the compass again. The needle hesitated for a split second before pointing north. Just a tiny pause, like it had to think about it. I clipped it back onto my pack and didn't look at it the rest of the drive home. I was driving home from my sister's place in Prescott, Arizona, a little past 10 on a Sunday night. It's about an hour and a half back to where I live in Cottonwood, and I've done that drive more times than I can count. I usually take 89A through Jerome since the I-17 feels too long and empty at night, but that route twists through the mountains and gets dark fast. You can go 10, 15 minutes without seeing another set of headlights. That night was clear and dry. Cool, mid-60s, no wind. I had the window cracked, just enough for air, and my music low. The kind of drive where you zone out a bit just following the white lines. About halfway through the switchbacks, I noticed something weird up ahead. A faint shimmer on the road, like heat haze. It didn't make sense because the asphalt wasn't warm at that hour. When I got closer, it was gone. Probably just my headlights reflecting off something slick. I didn't think much of it until maybe 20 minutes later when I hit the long straight stretch near Jerome. That's one of the few open areas up there where the road levels out and you can see the stars clearly through the windshield. I remember glancing up while rounding a curve and realizing the stars looked different. They weren't twinkling, they were moving. Not fast, not like shooting stars, just shifting slightly in slow, uneven pulses. At first I thought it was my eyes adjusting, maybe my windshield had a film on it. I pulled the collar of my shirt to wipe a spot clean and looked again. Still moving. It was subtle, the kind of thing you could almost convince yourself you weren't actually seeing. But I kept glancing back, and after maybe 30 seconds I was sure. The stars were pulsing, not blinking, not changing brightness, but drifting in tiny bursts, like a ripple through the whole sky. I slowed down to around 30 and leaned forward over the wheel, staring up through the glass. It was dead quiet outside except for the tires on the road. Then all at once, the dash lights in my car dimmed. Everything flickered. Headlights, radio, gauges, just for a second, long enough for my stomach to drop. The headlights went almost completely out and then came back. I thought maybe my alternator was dying, but the car itself didn't stutter. The engine kept running smooth. The sky pulsed again. It was like a pattern now. Every time the light inside my car flickered, the stars seemed to shift a little harder. The rhythm lined up almost perfectly, like they were connected somehow. I pulled over onto one of the scenic turnout points and put the car in park. The headlights lit the guardrail, the gravel shoulder, and part of the drop beyond. I turned off the radio and just sat there, trying to figure out what the hell I was looking at. The air felt heavier than before. It's hard to explain. It wasn't wind or pressure exactly, but something about it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I got out of the car, leaving it running, and stood on the shoulder. Out there, the stars looked sharper than ever. The Milky Way cut across the sky in this bright white smear, and sure enough, the longer I stared, the more they seemed to move. Not together, not like the whole sky was shifting, but individually. Tiny movements, random, like dust motes in slow water. The air went totally still. Then my headlights flickered again, off and back on, and I swear the stars above me lurched. Not a trick of the eyes, not some slow drift. They jumped. It only lasted an instant, but it was enough to make me stumble back toward the car. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I climbed inside and slammed the door, sitting there with both hands gripping the wheel. The flickering stopped. The lights held steady. The stars looked normal again. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes before putting it in drive and heading downhill. The whole way, I kept glancing at the dash, waiting for the next flicker. My GPS on my phone was fine, battery steady, music normal. When I came around the last bend before Jerome, I saw a light flash in the rearview mirror. I thought it was another car, but there wasn't one. I slowed down, craning to look. The light was still there, but it wasn't moving. It just hung low behind the tree line, white and steady. Then it blinked out. I don't know why, but I pulled over again, right past a small overlook with an old stone wall. I got out with my phone flashlight, scanning behind me. No sound, no movement, just the faint hum of my engine idling. When I looked up again, the stars weren't pulsing anymore, but there was a single one that seemed off. Brighter than the rest, lower too. It was right above the tree line, dead still. I watched it for a full minute before realizing it was getting bigger. At first, I thought it was a plane coming toward me, but it wasn't flashing or moving laterally. It just expanded slowly, evenly, like it was drifting forward. The light was pure white, no halo, no noise. It felt impossibly far away and way too close at the same time. I stepped back toward the car, and right as I grabbed the door handle, my headlights cut out completely. The dash lights went dead, my phone screen froze, even the engine sound dropped out like someone hit mute on the world. I could feel the silence pressing in on my ears. Then came a faint buzzing, like a transformer far off in the distance. It rose until I could feel it vibrating through the metal of the car. I turned my head toward the trees, and that's when I saw small, flickering points of light moving between them. Not fireflies, not flashlights, just faint white glows darting low to the ground, maybe 50 yards away. They moved in perfect unison, then for all at once. The sky pulsed again, one deep, rolling flicker, and the lights in the trees disappeared. The buzz faded, and my car came back to life on its own. Headlights on, radio humming static. I jumped in and floored it down the mountain. Once I reached Jerome, everything looked normal again. Streetlights steady, houses quiet. But my radio still wouldn't pick up a signal, just faint crackles and pops that almost sounded like voices underwater. I got home around midnight. When I pulled into my driveway, I killed the engine and sat there for a while. I could see the stars again through the windshield, and they looked normal, still, silent. But when I shut the door and started walking toward the house, I noticed the motion light above the garage flicker. On, off, on. The same rhythm I'd seen on the road. I stood there staring up at it, then at the sky. Everything was quiet. I went inside, locked the door, and didn't look outside again that night. The next morning, when I got in my car, the clock on the dash was flashing 12. My phone had the right time, so it wasn't a power outage at home. I reset the clock and drove to work. Everything ran fine, but I caught myself checking the sky more than once. It looked normal, almost too normal. I was camping alone that weekend, something I'd done a few times before, mostly when I needed to get away from everything. I'm not some hardcore survival guy or anything, but I know my way around the woods. This was in late September, up near the Sierra Nevada foothills, outside a town called Twain Harte. I'd parked off one of the forest access roads, hiked in about a mile, and set up camp near a small creek that ran down from the ridge. It was cool that night, maybe mid-40s. No wind, no rain, just a calm, clear night. I'd eaten around 7, read for a bit by lantern light, then turned in early. It was one of those perfectly quiet nights where you could hear every small sound. An owl, a branch creaking, water trickling. I must have dozed off around 9. When I woke up, I had no idea what time it was. The first thing I noticed was that the tent looked wrong. The walls had this faint glow to them, not bright, but just enough to outline everything in a dull, bluish light. I thought maybe the moon had come out, but it didn't look like moonlight. It wasn't diffused like that. It was softer, steadier, almost like someone had set up a lantern right outside. I just laid there for a minute, trying to figure out what I was seeing. The light didn't flicker or move, and there wasn't any sound. No footsteps, no voices, no wind. I reached for my phone to check the time, but the screen wouldn't turn on. Dead. I was sure I'd charged it. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I sat up, unzipped my sleeping bag, and listened. Nothing. The creek that had been running steady all evening sounded gone. Not quiet. Gone. It was so silent it actually hurt my ears. I could hear my own pulse. I leaned forward and unzipped the tent just enough to peek through. The second I did, the glow outside cut out completely. One moment the tent was lit up, the next, pitch black. My eyes couldn't adjust fast enough. It was like someone flipped a switch. I froze, waiting to hear something. An animal, a person, anything. But there was just this thick, heavy quiet that made me feel like the air itself had stopped moving. I stepped out slowly, flashlight in hand, but when I hit the button, it didn't turn on either. I tapped it, shook it, nothing. I could barely see my own boots. The stars were out, but they looked muted somehow, like there was a faint haze. I turned a full circle, trying to get my bearings, and realized I couldn't see the creek or the outline of the ridge anymore. It was like the forest had swallowed all depth. I called out a quick, awkward hello before I could stop myself. My voice sounded weird, muffled, like I was shouting into a pillow. It didn't echo at all. I stood there for maybe a full minute before I caught something out of the corner of my eye. A quick flicker of light between the trees, low to the ground. It was faint and cold-looking, like a reflection off metal, but there shouldn't have been anything reflective out there. It blinked once, then again, then vanished. I waited, staring at the spot where it had been, and that's when I noticed something else. The smell. It was metallic, almost like ozone after lightning, sharp enough that it made my nose sting. The air felt dry and charged, like right before a storm, except the sky was perfectly clear. I crouched down, trying to make out any sound, and thought I heard a low hum. It was hard to tell if it was real or in my head. It wasn't coming from any direction. It just filled the air, steady and deep, like it was vibrating through the ground. I went back toward my tent, moving slow so I wouldn't trip. The hum got a little louder with each step. It wasn't unbearable, but I could feel it in my chest, like standing near a subwoofer. My flashlight flickered once in my hand and died again. When I reached the tent, I saw it was glowing again. Not bright, but enough that I could see the seams of the fabric glowing pale blue. I couldn't see any light source. The glow just sort of existed. I don't know why, but I touched the tent wall. It was cold. Colder than the air. The instant my hand made contact, the hum stopped. Just gone, like someone cut the power. And again, silence. So complete, I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Then came the sound of something moving in the trees behind me. Not walking exactly. It was slower than footsteps, but heavier than an animal rustling through brush. It was a dragging kind of movement, like something was sliding across damp ground. I turned toward it, trying to spot anything, but the light from the tent was too dim to see past a few feet. Whatever it was, it stopped when I moved. For the first time all night, I thought about just leaving, packing up in the dark and hiking out. But the problem was, I didn't know which direction was which anymore. The compass I kept clipped to my pack strap was hanging right by the tent door. I grabbed it and flicked my wrist to check it. The needle didn't move. It was stuck pointing northeast, no matter which way I turned. I tapped the glass, nothing. When I looked up again, the glow around the tent started to dim, fading slow like a dying bulb. The hum came back, lower this time, almost beneath hearing. My chest started vibrating again, and every hair on my body stood up. I backed away from the tent, clutching the compass even though I didn't know why. Then I saw a faint pulse of light, deeper in the woods. A single flash, then another. They were spaced apart, like slow breathing. Each time the light pulsed, the hum got a little louder. I could feel it through the soles of my boots now. I don't remember deciding to move, but I found myself stumbling back toward where the road should have been. I knew it was uphill from my sight, so I just started climbing, one hand out in front of me. My eyes were tearing from how dry the air had gotten. The hum built into this deep resonance that made my vision blur. My legs felt weak, like the ground was vibrating through me. I must have gone a couple 100 yards before the noise cut out mid-pulse, leaving total silence again. I stopped, listened. Nothing. Then, from behind me, I saw one final flicker of blue light through the trees. faint, diffused, and rising upward like mist catching headlights. It lifted slow, higher and higher, until it disappeared above the tree line, and then it was just gone. I waited a long time before heading back down. I didn't even realize I'd been gripping the compass so hard until I saw my knuckles. When I finally reached the tent again, the glow was gone completely. The air smelled normal. I could hear the creek again, running steady like before. I checked my phone. It turned on just fine. The time read 3:12 a.m. I sat awake until dawn, wrapped in my sleeping bag with the lantern on. I didn't sleep again. When the sun came up, everything looked exactly the same as it had the day before, except the compass still wouldn't move. I tried shaking it, spinning in a circle, even holding it near my car later that morning. The needle stayed locked northeast, frozen in place like it was glued there. I keep it on my desk now. It still hasn't moved. It was early September last year, a few days after Labor Day. I remember because the heat had finally started breaking and the nights were getting cooler again. I lived just outside Lincoln, Nebraska, in a rental house off a 2-lane road that runs between miles of cornfields. You can drive for 15 minutes in either direction and not see another house. That's part of why I like it. It's quiet. That night, I was sitting on the back steps around 10:30, drinking a beer and scrolling on my phone. The crickets were loud and I could smell the corn. It's this dry, sweet smell that sticks to the air at the end of summer. There were a few clouds, but mostly clear sky. Then I saw this red light out past the tree line. At first, I thought it was a plane. Lincoln's airport isn't that far, and sometimes you see their landing lights over the fields. But this one was moving wrong. It was too low, and it wasn't blinking like normal aviation lights. It kind of glided in a slow arc, like it was being pushed by the wind, except the air was completely still. I stood up and stepped out into the yard for a better look. The light was hovering maybe 200 feet up, maybe more. Hard to tell against the dark. It was red, but not bright, almost like the glow from a brake light behind fog. I watched it for a while, trying to figure out what it could be. Then I realized it wasn't moving horizontally anymore. It was drifting straight down, slow and steady, toward the cornfield behind my property. I went inside, grabbed my phone charger from the wall, and checked the battery. 67%. Plenty. I opened the camera and started recording. I crossed my backyard to the fence line. The air was dead quiet now, like the bugs had stopped. Even the faint hum from the highway was gone. I zoomed in on the light. The camera had trouble focusing, so it kept flashing in and out of blur, but I could still see it moving down until it looked like it was just above the corn. Then it stopped. It stayed there, maybe 50 feet above the stalks, totally still. It wasn't flickering or pulsing, just glowing. A soft, steady red. My phone mic picked up my breathing. I remember because later, when I played the video back, I could hear how shaky it was. I whispered something like, "What the hell is that?" and started walking closer to the fence. The corn was maybe 5 feet high at that point, and there was a narrow dirt path between the rows that ran toward the irrigation ditch. I kept filming while leaning over the fence, trying to angle my phone between the stalks. The light didn't move at all. Then, just when I thought it was completely still, it dipped lower, maybe 5 or 10 feet, and stopped again. At that point, I noticed something weird with the phone. The timer on the video froze for a second. The seconds counter just stopped moving, even though I was still holding the camera steady. Then it skipped forward by 3 seconds like it was catching up. That's when the sound started, not from the light, but from the ground. It was a faint vibration like the feeling you get when a semi passes far away. It wasn't loud, but I could feel it through my shoes. The fence rattled softly. I looked down, expecting to see an animal running through the corn or something, but the stalks were still. When I looked back up, the red light flickered once, then again. Each time the vibration stopped, then started again. It did that 3 times before it suddenly shot upward. Not fast like a flash, but fast enough that I gasped. It rose straight up into the air, stopped again about halfway to where it started, and then tilted sideways and glided off across the field, completely silent. I watched it until it disappeared behind the clouds. Then everything went back to normal. The crickets started again, the hum from the highway came back, Even the smell of the corn returned. It was like the world exhaled. When I looked down, my phone was still recording. The battery had dropped to 19%. I stopped the video and went inside to plug it in. It took a second to start charging, but once it did, I opened the camera roll and watched the footage right there in the kitchen. The video was clear enough that you could see the red light, the fence, and my backyard faintly illuminated. The audio picked up the bugs going quiet, and the whole thing looked exactly like what I'd just seen. I watched it twice. I even texted it to my friend Shane, who works nights at a gas station in town. He didn't answer. The next morning, when I woke up, my phone was completely dead. I thought maybe I'd forgotten to plug it in properly, but when I checked the cable, it was still connected. The phone wouldn't power on at all. I held the buttons, plugged it into my laptop, nothing. I left it on the charger for another half hour before it finally booted. The battery read 1%. When it came back up, all my apps were fine, my texts were still there, but the video was gone. Not just missing from the gallery, gone. The thumbnail was still in my recent folder, but when I tapped it, the screen went black, and then the file disappeared right in front of me. No deleted notification, no transfer, just gone. I checked my text to Shane. The message I'd sent was there, but the attachment icon was missing, like I'd sent a blank text. I asked if he'd seen it, and he replied, "Seen what?" That afternoon, I drove into town and showed my phone to a guy at the repair shop. He looked through the storage folders and said it didn't look like the video had ever existed. The file path I described didn't show up anywhere in the system logs. He said sometimes files get corrupted when phones crash during recording, but my phone hadn't crashed. It had kept recording after the light left. That night, I went back outside to the same spot by the fence. Nothing was there. No burned patches, no broken corn. Just the same quiet field stretching out under the stars. For a while, I convinced myself it had to have been a drone or something. Maybe someone messing around out in the fields. But it didn't make sense. There was no sound at all. No wind from the rotors, no flicker of green or white navigation lights, nothing. And drones don't just hover perfectly still for 5 minutes, then shoot straight up a few hundred feet without a sound. I didn't see anything again for weeks. Then, around late October, something strange happened with my phone again. It was around midnight, and I was sitting in bed scrolling. The screen froze for about 2 seconds and then flashed white before going back to normal. When it did, the battery icon dropped by exactly 20%. I wasn't even recording anything, just reading. I checked the Photos app out of curiosity, and the most recent thumbnail was a black rectangle with no timestamp. When I tapped it, the screen stayed black for maybe 5 seconds before the app closed by itself. The photo was gone after that. It hasn't happened since. A few weeks later, I bought a trail camera and set it up on a post by the fence, facing the cornfield. I left it running every night for about 2 months. It caught coyotes, deer, a stray cat once, but no lights. Nothing unusual. Then, one night in December, I noticed something odd on one of the clips. Around 2:30 a.m., the footage cut out for about 8 seconds, just static and digital noise, and when it came back, the timestamp had jumped forward by exactly 3 minutes. The image that returned showed a faint red haze across the top of the frame, like reflected taillights, except there's no road anywhere near there. I still have that clip saved. It plays fine, no corruption. But every time I plug the SD card into my laptop, the folder that contains it disappears for a second before showing back up again. It's small, just a little flicker, but it happens every time. I haven't seen the red light again. But every time I walk out there at night, I still glance toward the cornfield, half expecting to see it drifting low over the stalks again, waiting. I was flying a charter from Denver to Chicago that October night. I work as a commercial pilot, mostly small jets and regional flights, but this one was a bit unusual. A late-night run with almost no air traffic. The sky was mostly clear with a few scattered clouds, and the temperature at altitude was the usual 60-degree Fahrenheit or so. Nothing seemed off when we climbed out, and the first few hours were routine. I was sitting in the cockpit, throttles set, autopilot engaged, and talking quietly with my co-pilot, Marlon. We were just running through checklists, sipping coffee, mostly watching the instruments, when I caught a glint out the left window. I leaned closer. "Did you see that?" I asked, pointing. Marlon didn't at first. I wasn't sure if it was a reflection at first, too. The cockpit lights sometimes catch on the canopy. But this was different. There was a small silver sphere just hovering at our altitude, maybe a few hundred feet off the wing. It was perfectly round, no markings, no lights, just metallic and reflective like polished chrome. I slowed the autopilot's pitch slightly, curious, keeping an eye on it. The sphere mirrored every movement. I banked left, it banked left. Increased speed, it increased speed. It matched us exactly. I called it out on the radio, not that I expected ATC to see it, but standard procedure, and got no response beyond the usual static of flight frequencies. Marlon was quiet, staring. He's the type that doesn't freak out easily. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" he asked, voice low. "Yeah," I said. "It's pacing us. Exactly. No lag. No deviation." I switched off the seatbelt sign and slid the throttle to full cruise, testing it. The sphere accelerated instantly, keeping pace without hesitation. I tried a gentle climb, and it climbed with us, perfectly level, no turbulence, no wobble. For a minute or two, we just flew side by side. The sphere didn't make a sound. No hum, no electromagnetic interference on the instruments, nothing. I reached over and checked the radar, nothing. The transponder didn't pick it up. Marlon leaned over and grabbed the radar display. "You seeing this?" He pointed. Blank screen, just empty sky. Then, the first cloud started rolling in ahead. Big storm cells. Nothing unusual, just a routine October thunderstorm forming over Iowa. I watched as the sphere approached them. It didn't hesitate. 1 second it was beside us, the next it darted straight into the cloud line. I called out instinctively, "Hey, hold on!" The moment it entered the cloud, our instruments didn't spike. No turbulence, no static, just gone. The radar still showed nothing. The visual cleared moments later, nothing. The clouds had swallowed it entirely. I glanced at Marlon, who just shook his head. I double-checked my logs and instruments. Everything normal. No warnings, no electrical anomalies, nothing. We climbed out above the clouds and scanned the skies. Nothing. We reported the incident to the FAA after landing. They took notes, asked questions, then told us there were no other aircraft in our area and no known experimental programs that night. I filed it as unidentified, but obviously it made the rounds at dispatch and my airline. People were polite but dismissive, probably chalked it up to fatigue or reflections. I thought about it the entire way home. The sphere wasn't like anything I've seen in military or commercial flights. It didn't behave like a drone or weather balloon. No propulsion, no exhaust, nothing. Just mirrored our movements perfectly and vanished in a cloud like it was never there. I still dream about it sometimes. The way it hung there silently, reflective, pacing us like it was keeping perfect time. I check the skies differently now, especially at night flights. Every glint on a wing, every cloud, I notice it. And every time I remember how completely normal the rest of the world seemed, while something inexplicable was keeping pace with us at 40,000 feet. I haven't seen it again. Not in training flights, not in my commercial runs. Just that night. Just that sphere. And the memory of it is unsettling. Not because it hurt me or tried to do anything, but because it defies explanation. And I don't know what it was. The logs, the radar, the instruments, all normal. The sphere itself, gone. And yet the image of it pacing us perfectly, silent, metallic, disappears only when it wants to, is stuck in my mind like it was realer than anything else I've ever flown with. I was flying a late-night cargo run from Minneapolis to Denver, a solo trip in a Bombardier CRJ-200 converted for freight. I prefer these flights, no passengers, minimal radio chatter, just me, the plane, and the sky. That night was clear for the most part, just a few scattered clouds over Kansas. The instruments showed smooth air, autopilot on, and the whole trip was routine until I crossed the Nebraska border. It started with a glint out of my left window, just above the wing. At first, I thought it was another plane, maybe a small private craft, but nothing on the radar. I slowed my coffee sipping, leaned closer to the window, and that's when I realized it wasn't moving like a plane. It was a perfect sphere, metallic, reflecting the cabin lights faintly, hovering at our altitude. I called it out on the radio to Denver Center just to cover myself. Center, unidentified traffic, approximately my 10 o'clock, same altitude. I heard the usual crackle, then a dismissive, no traffic reported. I checked my instruments, looked over the cockpit, all normal. The sphere matched our heading and altitude perfectly. I nudged the plane up by a few hundred feet. The sphere went up too. I slowed, banked slightly. It mirrored everything I did, almost instantly, almost exactly. I tried to rationalize. A drone? Too high, too fast? Military test craft? I'd flown in areas with restricted airspace. Nothing operates like this without radar signature. It was silent. Absolutely no engine noise, no hum, nothing. I grabbed my headset, leaned closer to the window, and whispered, "What the hell are you?" For a couple of minutes, it just followed side by side, pacing me like a shadow. I even tried a gentle climb, autopilot still engaged, and it climbed too, smooth as silk. I started to feel a creeping tension I didn't want to admit, that weird sense of being watched in a way that's almost impossible at 40,000 feet. Then I noticed the clouds, big cumulonimbus cells building up to the west, lightning flashing inside them. Routine, except the sphere turned and darted straight toward the storm line. I called out instinctively, "Hey, hold your course." But of course it didn't respond. It reached the edge of the storm, and as it entered the cloud, my instruments didn't detect a thing. No turbulence, no spike in the magnetic compass, nothing on the radar. It was gone, just swallowed by the cloud. I followed carefully, keeping a safe distance. The cloud was turbulent enough that any normal aircraft would show it on instruments, but the sphere was invisible. I circled the cell, watching for any glint, any sign. Nothing. It vanished as if it had never been there. Marlin would have been here if this were a two-pilot flight. He's the kind of guy who would joke, try to rationalize it. But alone in the cockpit, all I had was my own senses, and they were screaming, "That just happened." After about 15 minutes, I reported it again on the radio, more out of habit than hope. "Denver Center, I'm clear of the storm, no contacts, but I just observed something unusual at altitude." The controller cut me off politely. No acknowledgement, just an understood. I logged it in the flight record, detailing altitude, coordinates, and times. But it felt insufficient. My written account couldn't capture the way it moved. Fluid, precise, deliberate. Not mechanical. Not like anything I'd flown with. The rest of the flight was uneventful. Landing in Denver was normal, taxi, unloading, pre-flight checklists for the return. But I couldn't shake it. I kept replaying the image in my head. The sphere, side by side, pacing me silently, darting into the storm like it belonged there. I've flown almost every night since then. Hundreds of hours over plains, mountains, coasts. Nothing. Not a glint, not a signal, not a reflection. But every time I pass a cumulonimbus line, I glance toward the top of it, half expecting a metallic orb to appear, matching my speed. I told a few colleagues, cautiously with no names. Everyone nods politely. Some tell me it was probably a reflection. Some suggest I imagined it under fatigue. I don't think I did. I've seen clouds, storms, lights, and reflections. This wasn't any of those. I've reviewed the radar logs and they confirm nothing but the storm cells. My instruments didn't lie. The sphere was real, or real enough to interact with my aircraft in perfect harmony. I'm back on the route tonight, same plane, same altitude, same autopilot setting. I keep a closer eye on the sky. The memory doesn't scare me exactly. It's more like a quiet unease, a weight that sits in the chest when I think about it. Because whatever it was, it moved with intent, it knew how to mirror me perfectly, and it vanished without a trace, leaving only questions. I haven't seen it again. Not in training flights, not in cargo runs, just that night. Just that silver sphere pacing me at 40,000 feet, silent, impossible, gone in a storm. And I know I'll look for it every time I fly through a cloud for the rest of my career. I woke up to an odd quiet, not the usual morning quiet where the hum of the fridge or the low buzz of the street outside creeps in. This was total, almost unnatural silence. My phone was dark. The microwave, the coffee maker, my laptop, nothing. Even the wall clock in the kitchen had gone black. I rubbed my eyes and sat up. The only thing on was my old transistor radio sitting on the nightstand. It wasn't tuned to a station. It just hummed, low, steady, almost like it was breathing. I live alone in a small ranch-style house on the edge of town. The lights outside the window were faint. The sun was just starting to stretch across the sky. I thought maybe there was a power outage, but the street was normal. Neighbors' cars were moving, dogs barking, someone backing out of a driveway. Everything else seemed fine. Just my house was quiet. I leaned over and switched the radio off. The hum didn't stop. I flipped the switch a few times, unplugged it, still there. Muffled, steady, in time with something. I swear it sounded like inhaling and exhaling. I sat back, staring at it, thinking maybe I was half asleep. After a few minutes, I forced myself up. The floorboards creaked under my feet. I walked to the kitchen. Normally, the digital clock would greet me. Nothing. Not a flicker. I opened the fridge. It clicked and hummed normally. Lights inside. That was reassuring, I guess, but didn't make the feeling go away. I went outside to see if the power was out. No. The streetlights on the corner were off, but the houses down the street were lit. A few cars were moving along the main road, headlights cutting through the early morning haze. Everything seemed normal except for my house. Back inside, I sat at the kitchen table, listening. The hum was subtle, steady, not random. It almost felt alive. I tried to follow it, moving around the rooms. The sound seemed to track me. It was louder when I stood near the living room, softer in the bedroom. I circled, stood still, crouched. Same rhythm, same steady breath. I checked the windows, thinking maybe it was coming from outside, some utility work or a transformer. Nothing. No lights, no trucks, no people. Just the hum. I tried calling my mom. No dial tone. My neighbor, straight to voicemail. My phone had no service. I spent the next hour moving through the house, unplugging things, opening cabinets, checking the breaker box. Everything looked normal. Everything was fine. And still, that hum. Eventually, I returned to the bedroom, sat on the bed, and just stared at the radio. It wasn't making random interference like a normal old device. The hum was precise, measured. I found myself trying to match it with my breathing. It was close, very close, almost like it was in sync. I tried rationalizing, maybe it was some weird voltage anomaly, maybe some kind of interference. But I've lived here 15 years. I know the house. I know how electronics act. Nothing behaves like this. After another hour, I finally made coffee on the stovetop. I have a percolator for emergencies. As the smell filled the kitchen, the hum changed. It slowed just slightly, almost like it was adjusting. I froze, spoon hovering. The sound seemed to ebb and flow with the steam. I went outside again, trying to get a perspective. The morning sun was higher now, light hitting the dew on the grass. I half expected the sound to vanish if I left the house, but standing on the porch, it still pulsed through the walls. It was faint now, but definitely there. I walked around the perimeter, checking the foundation, the siding, anything. No cracks, no equipment, nothing that could hum like that. The birds were singing. Cars went by. Normal morning life. But my house, just that sound. Hours passed. The neighbors started moving normally, a few kids walking to the bus stop. I tried calling again. Service back. Phone fine. Lights flicked back on as if nothing had happened. The house slowly returned to normal. The hum faded, almost like it was never there. I spent the rest of the day cleaning and doing errands, trying to convince myself I had dozed off and dreamed it, or maybe hallucinated from too little sleep. But as night fell, I checked the radio again. Off, unplugged. I sat on the couch listening, quiet, for a while, nothing. Then a faint trace of rhythm, not loud, not continuous. But there, I haven't told anyone. I've asked myself over and over, was it a power anomaly, a trick of sound? I don't know, I've tried to recreate it. Nothing. I've moved rooms, plugged and unplugged, sat in silence. Never again. But sometimes late at night, I lie awake and think I hear it. Not full on, not the steady hum, just a subtle pulse, almost like a heartbeat, a reminder of that morning. It doesn't scare me exactly. It just makes me feel observed, like my house had a presence I couldn't explain. And I don't know why it happened or if it will happen again. All I know is that morning, every electronic in my house dead except that radio and that breathing hum that didn't belong to me. It was real. At least real enough that I'm still not sure I'm completely awake when I think about it. I keep the radio unplugged now. But sometimes I glance at it, half expecting it to start humming again, slow and steady, in time with something I can't hear anywhere else. It was sometime after 11 when I started heading home from my brother's place out in Klamath Falls. He and his wife had just had their second kid, and I'd stayed later than I meant to. I remember thinking I should have left earlier. The fog had started rolling in around 9, thick enough that you couldn't see much beyond the shoulder. I had a 2-hour drive ahead of me, mostly along Highway 140, which cuts through long stretches of forest and farmland with barely any lights. The road was quiet, no cars behind me, none coming the other way. Just fog, my high beams, and that low hum you get from the tires when the road's damp. I wasn't tired exactly, but I had that zoned out feeling you get on empty highways, like the world's been reduced to the patch of asphalt in front of your hood. About halfway home, maybe near Bly, the fog got worse. The trees started fading in and out like ghosts. I slowed down to 40, then 35. That's when I saw the first pair of headlights in the distance. They were far ahead, just two faint dots in the fog. I figured it was a car coming toward me. Nothing unusual about that. But after a minute or so, they still looked exactly the same distance away. Same faint glow, same position on the road. I thought maybe it was someone parked on the shoulder with their brights on. I dimmed mine and waited for them to pass. They didn't move. Another minute went by. The lights didn't grow any larger or smaller, just stayed there, steady and distant, like they were floating in place. I started to feel that creeping unease you get when something simple stops making sense. I checked my GPS out of habit, but the screen was blank. I tapped it, no response. The little charging light wasn't on either. My phone had died, even though it was at 70% when I left. I figured it was the charger cord or something, but when I glanced at my dashboard, I noticed the radio had gone silent. The time display was frozen, 11:42. The air vents still blew, the engine was fine, but the electronics were dead. I looked back at the lights, still there. Same exact spot. By then, I was down to about 20 miles an hour. The fog was so thick it looked solid in my headlights. I couldn't tell where the road ended and the trees began. The lights ahead flickered slightly, just for a split second, then steadied again. I thought maybe it was a reflection. Maybe I was just catching my own beams somehow. But the angle didn't make sense. Then they started to move. Slowly at first, just easing forward through the fog like a car rolling downhill without pressing the gas. I braced a little, expecting them to pass me, but they didn't. They kept the same distance. Always just far enough that I couldn't see the shape of the vehicle, just those two round white glows. I don't know how long that went on, maybe 10 minutes, maybe longer. The road curved slightly, dipped into a low valley. Every time I turned, the lights turned too, keeping their distance. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was just another driver being cautious in the fog, but it didn't look right. The lights didn't bounce or wobble like headlights usually do. They just glided. At one point, I thought I saw something else behind them, a faint bluish shimmer, like heat rising off asphalt, but it vanished as soon as I noticed it. When the road straightened out again, the lights suddenly grew brighter, like they were speeding toward me. My first instinct was to pull off. I hit my signal. No clicking sound. The indicator wasn't flashing. Then I noticed the power windows had stopped working. Everything electric was dead except the headlights and the engine. I eased onto the shoulder, half expecting the car to stall, but it kept running fine. I waited for the lights to pass. They didn't. They slowed down too, stopping the same distance ahead. I sat there for maybe a full minute, just watching. The fog moved in slow waves between us. I couldn't see the road, couldn't see the lines, just those lights floating there. Then, and I swear this is exactly how it happened, they lifted. Not high, not fast. Just up, like they were being pulled by a string, maybe 20 feet off the ground. Then they drifted sideways, smooth as glass, and vanished into the fog. I didn't move right away. My hands were clamped so tight on the steering wheel that my fingers ached. I kept waiting for them to come back, but the fog just swallowed everything. After a while, I put the car in drive and kept going, slow as hell, heart pounding the whole time. The next 10 miles were rough. Every time I thought I saw light ahead, my stomach dropped. Most of the time, it was nothing, just signs reflecting my beams or a patch of fog glowing weirdly. I didn't see another real car until I got near Lake of the Woods. That's when the fog started thinning out. The trees came back into focus, and I could finally see the road again. I glanced at the clock. It still said 11:42. My phone was still off, but the GPS screen flickered once and came back on. The time jumped straight to 12:56. When I pulled into my driveway around 1:30, the car electronics were all back to normal. Radio turned itself on mid-song. My phone powered up fine and showed full battery. No missed calls, no notifications, just normal. I tried to tell myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was just tired, maybe it was some weird light trick in the fog. But when I checked the map later, there wasn't any stretch of Highway 140 where the road disappears like that. And I know that section by heart. I've driven it dozens of times. Out of curiosity, I went back a week later, same time of night. No fog this time. Clear sky, stars visible. I thought maybe I'd find something. Maybe a field where someone could have parked, some kind of landmark. But there's nothing. Just trees and old fencing. No shoulder wide enough to pull over, no side road. I stopped at roughly the same spot anyway. Cut the engine, stepped out, completely silent out there. Not even crickets. I stood for a while listening. My breath was loud in the still air. Then, faintly, I heard something that sounded like a low hum, almost like power lines, except there aren't any along that stretch. It came in pulses, steady, then uneven, then gone. I didn't stay long after that. Got back in the car and headed home. A few days later, I was talking with a friend who works for ODOT, and I asked him if there'd been any weird reports from that area, fog lights, stalled vehicles, anything like that. He said no, but then he paused and asked why I was asking. I told him it was nothing, just that I'd seen something strange in the fog. He didn't say much after that, just gave me a look like he knew exactly what I meant but didn't want to talk about it. I've taken that route since then because the reason be always during the day. Nothing unusual, but every time I hit that long empty stretch near Bly, I get that same uneasy feeling, like there's something just out there past the tree line, waiting for the right weather to show up again. And sometimes, when the fog's heavy, I catch myself checking the rear view, half expecting to see those headlights hovering behind me, perfectly still, just waiting for me to stop. I woke up before the alarm that morning, which was unusual. My little cabin on Lake Crescent in Washington doesn't exactly encourage early rising, but the fog had rolled in heavy overnight, and I guess I was stirred by the light creeping around the window frames. I grabbed my thermos, threw on a jacket, and walked down the narrow dock. The water was flat, no wind, just that thick morning mist that makes the world feel swallowed whole. I put the small aluminum boat in the water, started the motor, and headed toward my usual spot near the old cedar stumps, a quarter-mile out from shore. The lake was gray and quiet, like it had absorbed sound overnight. Ducks floated by, but even they didn't make a noise. I leaned on the oars for a minute, just letting the motor idle, watching the fog swirl across the surface. I'd fished this lake for years, so I know the patterns. I dropped a line, looked down at the water, and that's when I noticed it. A reflection, bright and sharp. Not the sun, it wasn't up yet, and not the fog glinting. It was a triangle, a perfect geometric shape, hovering right over the water's surface, about the size of a canoe. Its edges were clean, almost glowing. The weird part, when I looked straight up, there was nothing. Just the gray sky and mist. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe it was the reflection of the cabin's light bouncing off my boat, or a trick of the fog. But as I scanned the lake, the shape stayed there, hovering in the reflection, even as I adjusted my position. I leaned forward, squinting. The triangle was perfectly mirrored on the water's surface, like it existed only there. I reached for my phone to take a picture, hands still damp from condensation, and noticed it was dead, fully dead. No charging icon, no flicker, nothing. That was strange, but not impossible. Phones die all the time. I shrugged, set it down, and focused on the triangle. Then it moved. Not like a fish swimming, not like drifting debris. It slid sideways across the water, perfectly parallel to the boat, maintaining its distance. I gripped the oars, thinking maybe I'd misjudged perspective. But no matter which way I leaned, the triangle stayed aligned with my view. I started paddling slowly toward it, and as I got closer, I noticed the reflection wasn't showing anything underneath. The water around it was calm, no ripples or waves, nothing moving. I tapped the surface with the paddle, just water. But the reflection didn't budge, it didn't distort. It stayed exactly the same size and shape, moving with me, almost like it was aware of my position. I stopped rowing and sat there for a few minutes. The fog started thinning a bit, the first streaks of dawn showing pink against the gray, and then the shape flickered, like a light being dimmed and brightened twice in a row. I thought maybe I was imagining it, fatigue playing tricks. But I've been out on this lake alone at dawn hundreds of times, and I know the difference between a shadow on water and something else. Then a faint vibration ran through the boat, subtle but real, like the kind you feel when the motor is running on high for too long. But my motor was idling. I reached down to check the cable connection, half expecting a loose wire, but everything was fine. The vibration stopped as soon as I lifted my hand. The reflection shifted again. This time, it pulsed, brighter, wider, like it was expanding for a second, then snapping back to the original triangle. I leaned over, trying to see some sort of object in the sky. Nothing. Just mist, pale light, and the top of the surrounding evergreens. I even spun the boat slowly, looking in every direction. Still nothing. Then the water itself changed. The area under the triangle went completely still. No mist drifting over it, no ripples from the slight wind, nothing. It was like the water had become a mirror only for that shape. I reached out to touch the surface, and for a moment, it seemed like my hand hesitated just above it, as if the water was denser there. Then normal again. I pulled the line in, heart beating faster than usual for a quiet morning. Nothing caught, of course. Nothing could. My hands were trembling a little, which isn't like me. I took a deep breath and started slowly paddling back toward the cabin, keeping my eyes on the reflection. As I got closer to the shore, the triangle began to fade. Not gradually, more like someone dimmed a switch. The bright, perfect edges softened, blurred, then disappeared completely. I stopped rowing for a moment, staring at the calm lake, half expecting it to reappear. Nothing. Just the ordinary fog and the ripples from the morning breeze. By the time I tied the boat to the dock, the sun had started to peek over the hills. The lake looked normal again. Nothing out of place. Ducks quacked, wind ruffled the reeds. The entire experience, all 30 or 40 minutes, felt like it had never happened. Back in the cabin, I tried my phone again. Dead still. I plugged it into the wall. The charging light came on immediately, battery showing 100%. All the notifications I would have missed were already gone, like they never existed. I poured some coffee and sat on the porch, staring at the water. I told myself I was tired, seeing tricks in the fog, imagining reflections where there weren't any. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like whatever I saw didn't belong to the physical world, but interacted with it anyway. A few days later, I asked around the marina if anyone else had seen anything weird in the fog over the lake. No one had. Some old-timers laughed it off, said the mist plays tricks, makes shapes where there are none. I wanted to tell them about the reflection and the pulsing light, but I didn't. It sounded insane. I go out fishing often, same lake, same hours, but I haven't seen it since. Sometimes I wake before dawn, fog heavy over the water, and I get that feeling again. Like something's just beneath the surface, waiting. But when I push off in the boat, nothing shows. Still, every time the morning mist rolls in thick, I glance down at the water, half expecting that bright triangle to appear. Even knowing it probably won't, I can't help looking. Something about it didn't belong, and the lake hasn't been the same since. I've tried to recreate it, different angles, early light, reflections from cabin lights, nothing. There's no explanation, and maybe there never will be. I just know what I saw, a triangle, perfectly reflected, moving in ways water can't, fading before I could reach it, leaving the lake calm and ordinary again. And that's the thing, it wasn't threatening, not really, just impossible, out of place. It stayed in the world long enough for me to see, but short enough that I could never prove it existed. It left me with nothing but the memory, the fog, and a lake that seems quieter now than it did before. I was driving back from Bishop, California, heading south toward Lone Pine, a stretch of highway I've taken dozens of times. It was just after 9 on a Thursday night, early spring, clear sky, barely any traffic. The air out there has that dry, empty feeling where sound doesn't carry right. I had the windows cracked, radio low, mostly just zoned out, thinking about work stuff. A few miles past Big Pine, I saw lights above the ridge to my right. At first I thought it was a plane, or maybe the lights from that small wind farm past Independence. But then they shifted, 5 of them, in a kind of rough V shape, all white but dim, like they were behind thin fog even though the sky was totally clear. I slowed down, watching them through the windshield. They moved slow, steady, perfectly even. No blinking, no color change, no sound. I pulled off onto the gravel shoulder. There's nothing out there but sagebrush and sand, and killed the engine. The highway went completely silent except for the ticking from the cooling engine. The lights kept gliding across the ridge, maybe a mile or two out. I could tell they weren't on the mountain because they were too uniform. They were above it, definitely airborne, and they turned slowly until the formation was almost horizontal. I pulled out my phone and started recording. You can see a lot of stars out there, and these weren't stars. They were moving too precisely. I zoomed in and caught maybe 10 seconds before the screen froze. The phone didn't crash. It just froze like the camera app couldn't process what it was seeing. I tapped the screen a few times, then it went black. When I tried turning it back on, nothing happened. That's when I noticed another set of headlights coming up the highway behind me. I didn't think much of it. People pull over out there all the time to rest or take pictures. The lights got closer, slowed, then stopped about 50 feet behind my car. I remember thinking it was strange they'd stop that close when there's plenty of room to pass. I checked the mirror to see if they'd step out, but no one did. I waited, watching, but the driver door didn't open. Just two bright headlights cutting across the asphalt. Then I realized something wasn't right. The beams weren't hitting my car. They weren't hitting the road either. The light wasn't moving forward. It was pointing straight up. Both beams. It was like someone had tilted the headlights 90 degrees, aimed them right into the sky. At first, I thought it was some trick of the angle or the mirrors. I opened my door and stepped out. The air was cold, still. Gravel crunched under my boots. I turned around and stared at the car behind me. Some kind of older sedan, dark color. Couldn't tell the make from that distance. The lights were definitely aimed straight up, glowing into the night like two bright columns. The weirdest part was that there was no spill or diffusion, just two sharp beams that stopped at a certain height, like hitting a ceiling I couldn't see. I called out, just a quick, "Hey, you all right?" and started walking toward it. No movement. I got maybe halfway before I heard something behind me, a faint buzzing, low and rhythmic, coming from the direction of the lights over the ridge. I turned back toward the hills. The 5 lights had broken formation. They were shifting around, slower now, almost drifting, but in a way that didn't look random. They'd slide apart, then back together, then stop completely. It was like watching something underwater, that kind of slow, deliberate movement. I glanced back at the car behind me. Still no one. The headlights kept shining up into the sky, not flickering, not dimming. I walked another few feet toward it, trying to make out the interior. The windows were dark, almost reflective. I couldn't see anyone inside. No engine sound, no exhaust, nothing. That's when the buzzing changed. It deepened. Not louder, just lower, like it dropped an octave and started vibrating through my chest. I turned back toward the ridge again, and the lights started moving upward, one by one. They weren't taking off quickly. It was like they were being lifted by invisible strings. Each one rose in perfect sequence, evenly spaced, until they disappeared into the sky. I kept watching, waiting for something else to happen. The buzzing faded with them until it was completely gone. Then it was just quiet, totally still. When I turned back to the highway, the car was gone. No sound of tires, no taillights, no dust. Just gone. The only light was from the stars and the faint glow of my own dashboard through the windshield. I stood there for a while, trying to wrap my head around it. I walked over to where the car had been parked. I could see the tire marks in the gravel shoulder, the ones leading up to where it had stopped, but there weren't any tracks leading away. Just the pair of indentations ending abruptly, like the car had vanished without moving forward or backward. I got back in my car and started the engine. It fired right up. The radio came on by itself, loud static, no signal. I turned the volume down and drove off slowly, glancing in the mirrors every few seconds. The phone still wouldn't turn on. When I reached Lone Pine, I stopped at a diner that stays open late. I plugged my phone into the wall while I ordered coffee, but it didn't charge. The battery symbol just stayed at 0. I left it plugged in for maybe 15 minutes before it finally flickered back on. But when it did, the time was wrong. It said 2:18 a.m. I checked my watch. It was barely past 10:30. The video was gone. Not corrupted, not blank, just not there at all. The last saved file was from earlier that day. I asked the waitress if the power had flickered or if there'd been any weird outages lately. She shook her head, said everything had been normal. I didn't push it. When I drove home later that night, I made sure to keep my eyes straight ahead. The highway looked the same, but that stretch, the one between Big Pine and Independence, felt different. Every time I passed a car, I checked their headlights in the mirror just to make sure they were still pointing forward. A few days later, I drove back up there during daylight, mostly to see if there were any signs of that other car. I found the exact turnout, same mile marker, same shoulder, and the tire marks were still there, but faint. They ended exactly where I remembered. I walked around, looked for oil drips, debris, anything that would suggest someone had pulled away, but there was nothing. Just sand, gravel, and the sound of wind through the brush. Since then, I've gone through the phone's memory a dozen times. No trace of the video. The timestamps skip over that 10-minute window entirely. I've had weird phone glitches before, but not like that. Every time I drive that road now, I think about how quiet it was, how unnatural the silence felt between the buzzing and the fogless dark. Sometimes, when I crest the ridge near Independence and see the distant glow of the valley, I half expect to see those 5 lights hanging there again, or a set of headlights behind me, aimed straight into the sky. I don't stop anymore. I just keep driving. I was sitting on the back porch, drinking a can of beer and trying to get some work emails out of the way. It was late, maybe 10:30, maybe closer to 11. Spring nights in northern Arizona get quiet around that time. No crickets yet, just this low hum of nothing, the kind of silence that makes the air feel thick. I had the floodlight on the corner of the house pointing at the yard. Normally it only comes on when the motion sensor picks something up, but tonight, out of nowhere, it flickered on. At first I thought one of the bulbs was just dying, but the flicker was precise, like someone was tapping the sensor on and off. I set my beer down and leaned over to check the little panel on the side of the house. No readings, nothing. The sensor didn't register any movement. I shook my head and went back to my laptop. A few minutes later, the floodlight snapped fully on. I froze. The sensor light, that little green LED, was blinking like it had detected something, but the yard looked empty. I could see the gravel, the small oak tree I'd planted last year, the fence, even the neighbor's dog silhouette through their chain link. Nothing moved. No branches, no animals, nothing. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, just a little metallic tang like a car battery or something sparking in the air. I sniffed, trying to figure out if it was coming from the floodlight itself. The wiring was fine, no burnt plastic smell. The ozone smell hung over the yard, dry and sharp. I could almost taste it on the back of my tongue. I walked closer to the sensor, the porch light casting long shadows behind me. Every time I stepped near the corner, the floodlight flickered like a heartbeat. I held my hand out, pointing toward the yard, waiting to see if anything was there. Nothing. The shadows were still, the yard empty. Then I thought I saw movement at the edge of my vision, just past the fence. I blinked, and it was gone. Not like a person ducked behind a tree, but like it had been there 1 second and just wasn't the next. I took a step toward the fence, the gravel crunching under my boots, and the floodlight dimmed for a second, then flared back on. The air felt thicker now. The smell of ozone stronger, almost electric, like right before a storm, except there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I squinted into the shadows near the fence. Nothing. Not even the neighbor's dog. I pulled my phone out, thinking maybe I could catch something on camera. I recorded a short clip, panning slowly over the yard. The floodlight stayed steady, the sensor blinking on and off. When I looked at the screen, I didn't see any figures or shapes, but there was this kind of shimmer in the air, like heat waves you see over pavement in the summer. Only it was cold. It distorted the fence and the tree in a way that didn't make sense. I set the phone down and sat back on the porch steps, trying to reason it out. Maybe it was a trick of the floodlight. Maybe the motion sensor was malfunctioning. I leaned back, watching the yard, and the flicker started again. Slow at first, then faster, like a pulse. I could feel it in my chest, subtle but there. The rhythm of the light somehow synced with my own heartbeat. That's when I noticed the smell wasn't just ozone anymore. It was layered, almost like sulfur mixed in, barely perceptible, but enough to make my nose wrinkle. I could hear a faint hum now, low, continuous, almost too quiet to pick up at first. It didn't come from any device. It wasn't the refrigerator, wasn't a neighbor's generator. It seemed to come from the air itself, vibrating slightly across the yard. I got up again, walking slowly toward the corner of the house where the sensor was mounted. Each step felt heavier, like the air was resisting me. The floodlight flared again, then dimmed. I reached out and touched the sensor panel. Nothing. Cold, normal plastic. The hum stopped. I held my hand there, waiting. The air was silent, still. A second later, the floodlight went full on again. The hum returned, louder this time, more insistent. I could feel it in my chest and shoulders, a low resonance that made my teeth vibrate slightly. I stepped back and the light dimmed. I stepped forward and it flared again. I walked to the edge of the yard toward the tree. The flicker stopped when I got near it. I spun around slowly, looking at the fence, the gravel, the oak. Nothing moved, nothing at all. Just that hum fading in and out and the faint smell of ozone. I went back to the porch and sat down, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. I looked at the sky. Stars were clear, moon rising over the mountains, not a cloud in sight. No planes, no helicopters, no blinking lights. Just the quiet night and the occasional flicker of the floodlight. I pulled my blanket over my legs and kept watching. The flicker continued sporadically and the hum came and went, always just below the threshold of comfort. I stayed there for maybe an hour, watching, breathing, waiting. My phone had died again, just shut off mid-recording. Eventually, the light stayed on steadily, the sensor stopped blinking, the smell dissipated. I went inside, locked the door, left the porch light on. I checked every window before bed. Nothing moved. The house was normal. The floodlight still worked when I turned it on manually. I tried telling a friend about it the next day. He joked about it being raccoons or the wind. I said no, it wasn't like that. There was nothing physical in the yard, just the smell, the flicker, the hum. He shrugged and changed the subject. Weeks later, I drove past the house at night. Everything was quiet. The sensor worked fine. The yard looked normal. But sometimes late at night, when I sit out on the porch with a beer and the mountains are quiet, I swear I can smell that faint ozone again. And if I look at the corner floodlight, I half expect it to pulse in that same slow, impossible rhythm. I haven't seen anything move there since that night. Nothing visible. But I haven't been able to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Not physically, maybe, but in a way that didn't follow any rules I know. It was around 9:30 at night when I first saw it. We were parked on the shoulder of a 2-lane road that cut through the woods outside of Harlan, Kentucky. My friend Eric had pulled over so we could take a smoke break before the long stretch back to town. It was late spring, the air warm and still, and the trees on both sides of the road were thick enough to block most of the horizon. We'd just finished loading his fishing gear into the back of his truck after spending half the day at Laurel Lake. It was one of those nights where the woods felt deeper than usual. No wind, no bugs, just a heavy kind of quiet that made our voices sound louder than they should have. We were leaning against the tailgate, talking about nothing, when Eric stopped mid-sentence and squinted at the tree line behind me. "You see that?" he said. I turned around. At first, I thought he was pointing at a plane, but the light wasn't blinking. It was this solid white glow, not bright, just steady, hanging low over the trees maybe a mile away. It didn't move. Probably a drone, I said, though it felt too far out and too big for that. Eric just kept staring. "Nah, man, that's too quiet. You'd hear the hum." He was right. The woods were completely still, but there was no sound at all from it. I strained to listen. No whine, no motor, nothing. Just this silent, white oval hovering maybe 30 or 40 feet above the treetops. We watched it for a solid minute before anything happened. I remember blinking, just a normal blink, and when my eyes opened, the light was suddenly closer. Not in a gradual way. It was just there, maybe 200 feet away now, above the road. Eric swore under his breath and stepped back toward the truck. "What the hell?" I felt the same thing, a kind of pressure in my chest, like when you're standing too close to something you can't quite judge the size of. The light was motionless, completely still, not swaying or vibrating or anything. It looked like it was floating, but there was no beam, no outline, no structure around it, just light. I took my phone out to try filming it, but the camera wouldn't focus. The screen showed only black, no matter how I angled it. When I looked up again, it seemed closer, not by much, but enough that I felt like stepping backward would somehow matter. The woods behind us stayed dead quiet. Even the occasional distant highway noise was gone. Eric whispered, "Do you feel that?" I didn't answer because I was focused on what he meant. The air felt thick, almost like humidity before rain, but cooler. There was this faint vibration under my feet, like standing next to a big truck idling somewhere far away, except there was no sound to go with it. Eric reached for the door handle. "Let's go, man." "Wait," I said. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe, but I couldn't look away. The light was maybe the size of a van now, still featureless, completely white. Not blinding, but somehow hard to look at directly, like it didn't belong in the dark the way everything else did. Then it shifted, not moved, shifted. 1 second it was a single glowing oval, the next it was slightly higher and a few degrees to the left, like reality had skipped a frame. There was no in-between motion, no transition, just two positions. Eric swore again and started the truck. The headlights hit the trees ahead, and for a moment, the white light seemed to dim in response. It didn't flicker. It just became less visible, like the darkness around it was swallowing it. He revved the engine. "Get in!" I climbed into the passenger seat, my heart hammering. The second the doors shut, the vibration stopped. The woods were quiet again, like it had all been imagined. But when I turned to look out the rear window, the light was still there, hovering above the road behind us. We pulled out fast, tires crunching gravel. The light didn't follow, but it didn't fade either. It stayed exactly where it was, unmoving, hovering in that same perfect stillness. We turned the next bend, and the trees blocked it from view. For a while, neither of us said anything. The only sound was the hum of the tires and the occasional chirp of the engine cooling off. I kept glancing at the mirrors, half expecting to see the light behind us, but the road stayed dark. About 5 miles later, Eric slowed down near a gas station that was still open. He pulled into the lot and parked under one of the fluorescents. Neither of us got out. "What was that?" he said, finally. I didn't answer because I honestly didn't know what to call it. After a minute, he said, "You saw it move, right? That jump thing?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "You ever seen something that's still before? Like, perfectly still?" That was the part I couldn't shake. It wasn't just quiet or stationary, it was wrong somehow, like it existed separate from everything else around it. The stillness didn't feel natural. We sat there for a while, doors locked, just staring out at the empty highway. I kept expecting to see that light crest the hill behind us. It never did. Eventually, Eric drove me home. My place was closer than his, and when we pulled up to my driveway, the motion light above my garage flicked on automatically. For a split second, the color of it looked the same, that same cold, white tone. My stomach dropped. Then it normalized, just a regular bulb glow. Eric noticed too. "You see that?" "Yeah," I said. Neither of us laughed. He waited until I got inside before pulling away. I watched from the window as his taillights disappeared down the road. The night was quiet again. Too quiet. I didn't sleep much. Every time a car passed outside, I expected to see that white light through the blinds. The next morning, I checked the weather and local news. Nothing. No reports of strange lights, no drone activity, no aircraft sightings. I texted Eric around noon, asked if he'd told anyone. He hadn't. "People think we're drunk," he said. I went back to the spot later that evening, around the same time. The air felt normal again. Crickets out, a faint breeze moving the leaves. I parked in the same place and waited. The woods were just woods. But the silence the night before, that impossible stillness, stayed in my head like a sound I couldn't unhear. After about 20 minutes, I turned the truck around to leave. Right as my headlights hit the trees, I saw something reflective deeper in, past the first line of trunks. Just a flash, like glass catching the light. I stopped, reversed a little, aimed my beams into the trees. Nothing. Maybe it was dew on a branch, maybe my eyes were looking for patterns that weren't there. But as I sat there with the engine idling, that same faint vibration started up again, subtle, almost imagined, under my feet. I turned off the headlights. The woods went completely black. And for a second, I thought I saw the outline of something white between the trees. Motionless, soundless, too still to be real. I left the engine running and backed out slow. I didn't see anything follow. The road stayed dark all the way home. Eric moved to Knoxville a few months later. We haven't talked about it since. Sometimes I wonder if he thinks about it too. That jump, that light, the way the air felt wrong. Every now and then when I drive that same stretch of road at night, I look up at the tree line. Most nights there's nothing but stars. But sometimes, if the air is clear enough, I'll catch a faint glow in the distance. Low, white, and perfectly still. I started the drive around 6 p.m., leaving Springfield to head down to Little Rock. It was late October, the sky overcast, and the kind of cold that made your fingers go numb through the wheel if you didn't wear gloves. I had a tank full of gas, my playlist queued up, and the highway mostly empty for the first hour or so. I'd done this drive plenty of times for work, hauling parts between the two cities, so I wasn't expecting anything unusual. It started about an hour outside of Springfield. I was on the stretch past Ozark, that long straight bit where the trees thin out and you can see the hills ahead like they're floating. I glanced at my rearview mirror, just habitually, and noticed a bright white light behind me. At first, I assumed it was a truck with high beams, but I remembered seeing the headlights earlier, and this didn't match. The light was larger, rounder, softer, not cutting through the night like a car, more like a glowing orb. I squinted, thinking maybe my eyes were tricking me. The highway was empty, or at least the only other cars were far behind. I blinked, looked again, and the light hadn't moved. It was keeping pace with me, perfectly aligned in the center of my rearview mirror, as if it had a purpose. I told myself it was a plane, though it was too low. Maybe a drone? My phone didn't have service, and I didn't want to risk stopping on the shoulder. I kept driving, and the light stayed with me. 30 minutes passed, 45. I checked the mirror constantly, and it hadn't changed distance. No sound, no headlights, nothing. Just that white glow, rigidly following me, silently pacing me across the miles. I tried changing lanes. The light mirrored me. I sped up a little, and it did too. I slowed, and it did the same. I remember gripping the wheel tight, feeling this weird low vibration through the seat, almost like static electricity, but deeper, like the car itself was reacting to it. I kept glancing at the dashboard, trying to catch some clue, but everything read normal. No alerts, no warnings. At one point, I forced myself to check the side mirrors. Nothing on either side. No other vehicles. The rear view still held the light, perfectly centered. I pulled onto a small rest stop, reasoning I needed a break, maybe a coffee to shake off the tension. I eased onto the lot, headlights cutting through the mist that had begun settling over the asphalt. And there it was, the light, floating silently above the exit sign, not moving, not flickering, just hanging there like it had beaten me to the spot. I sat in the car a few minutes, telling myself I'd imagined it, that it had been a hallucination from fatigue. The air was cold, damp, and smelled faintly metallic. I grabbed my phone, finally got a signal, tried filming it. The screen showed black. No matter what I did, no video. I even tried snapping photos. Each one came out blank. I stepped out for a better look. The lot was empty, the highway quiet. The light stayed in place, suspended maybe 10 feet above the exit sign. My shadow stretched across the lot, but the light didn't interact with it. It didn't reflect off the asphalt, didn't scatter or glow outward. It just existed there, bright and solid. I went back into the car, started the engine, and considered leaving. Every instinct screamed to get back on the highway and not look back. When I glanced in the mirror, it had disappeared. Not dimmed, not faded, just gone. I blinked, turned the wheel slowly, checking the empty lot. Nothing. No reflection, no shape, nothing at all. I drove on, but the image lingered in my head. I kept glancing in the mirror, half expecting it to be there again. Every exit, every rest stop, every overpass, I looked. Nothing. The weirdest part came about 20 miles later. I passed a small creek underpass where the mist was thicker. For a moment, I could have sworn the white light was reflected in the water below, hanging over the asphalt as if floating. My heart raced, but when I blinked, the reflection was gone. No fog anomalies, nothing in the water, just my headlights and the usual reflection of the moon behind clouds. By the time I hit the outskirts of Little Rock, I was exhausted, but I kept checking the rear view out of habit. No light. The night felt ordinary again. I pulled into my driveway, engine still running, and sat for a few minutes, breathing, trying to shake the unease. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about it. I went back over the highway stretch in my mind, trying to pinpoint anything that could explain it. Trucks, planes, reflection off water, some weird atmospheric effect. Nothing fit. The behavior, following me for over an hour, appearing at the rest stop, then vanishing, didn't match anything I'd ever seen or read about. I called Eric, a buddy who liked night drives, and told him what happened. He didn't scoff, but he said, "You know, sometimes the air over those hills does weird things with lights." I wanted to believe that. I tried, but I still can't explain the solid, precise way it followed me. Not random, not drifting. Like it knew where I was and exactly how fast I was going. I drove that highway a few more times since then. Never saw it again. Sometimes, though, when the night is clear and the mist rolls in just right, I catch a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye in the rearview mirror. It's gone when I look directly. I've thought about filming it again, taking a longer detour, staying at the next rest stop, trying to catch it. But the thought of that white glow hanging silently in front of me, then following me for miles, keeps me from wanting to. It's not like anything I can point at and say is normal. It's just there. Not threatening, not moving, just quietly impossible. Even now, driving home at night, I glance in the rear view every few miles, always hoping not to see it, always wondering if it's still out there, waiting for someone else to notice. I woke up around 5:30 a.m., like I always do this time of year, and went straight to the kitchen for coffee. The sky was still dark, and the air had that damp, earthy smell that comes with early October mornings. I live out near Bentonville, Arkansas, about 10 minutes outside town on the edge of the Ozark foothills. My field's behind the house, nothing fancy, just a few acres I use for corn and a small pasture for the goats. I grabbed my thermos and headed out to check on things, not expecting anything unusual. The first thing I noticed was the smell, not the usual earthy, wet dirt smell. There was something metallic underneath it, faint but unmistakable. It didn't make sense at first, so I shrugged it off, thinking maybe the neighbor's tractor had leaked oil again. I walked down the lane toward the field, the grass wet with dew, and froze. The field looked different. Dozens of small, smooth stones were scattered across the bare soil where my corn had been harvested weeks ago. I mean small, perfectly round or oval, like someone had polished them to a mirror finish. I didn't notice anything like that last night. I'd walked the field after supper, just before dark, and there was nothing. Not one stone. I bent down and picked one up. It was warm. Not lukewarm from the sun, not leftover heat from the soil, warm in a way that made my skin tingle, versta, like holding a cup of hot coffee but without the smell. My fingers tingled against its surface, and for a moment I just stared at it, turning it over in my hand. There were no markings, no cracks, no dirt, just smooth, shiny, and perfectly uniform. I put it back down and looked around. The stones weren't in piles or patterns, but evenly spread across the field. I stepped a few paces. The soil was undisturbed. No footprints, no tire marks. My boots sunk into the dirt, and yet nothing indicated how these could have appeared overnight. I called my neighbor, Frank, who farms the next property over. He was half asleep on the phone, grumbling about the cold, and I explained what I'd found. "Are you sure, Jim?" he said. "Could have been a prank. Kids from town?" I told him no. I knew the kids around here. They wouldn't have moved across that whole field in the middle of the night. Not quietly, not leaving the stones so perfectly smooth and warm. He grumbled something about weather messing with me and hung up. I decided to take a closer look. I crouched, picking up another stone. Same warmth, same smoothness. I ran my fingers over it and felt a faint vibration, almost imperceptible, like the stone was resonating under my touch. I shook it gently. Nothing moved inside. No sound, just that faint hum against my palm. I walked to the far end of the field. The mist from the morning fog clung to the low hills, the trees along the perimeter looking dark and still. It was quiet, too quiet. Usually at this hour I'd hear birds or goats bleating from the pasture. Nothing. Even the wind was still. The only sound was that low vibration through the stones as I moved across them. like they were syncing with my steps. I picked up a third stone, heavier than it looked. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Text from my wife asking if I wanted breakfast. I didn't answer. I was too focused on the field. I noticed something odd at the edge where my fence ended near the creek. The stones stopped abruptly, like an invisible line ran through the field. I took a step forward past that line, and the stone's warmth disappeared. The last one I picked up on the other side was just cold, like any rock you'd find in the dirt. I put them all back down and tried to remember anything strange from the night before. I hadn't heard anything. No planes, no helicopters, no trucks. The goats were quiet, the dogs inside. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to rationalize it. Freak frost? Some odd mineral reaction in the soil? None of it made sense. I spent the next hour walking the field, picking up stones, noticing the warmth, the faint hum. Then I saw something. Not a shape, not a figure, just a movement at the tree line, a shimmer in the fog. I stopped breathing. For a few seconds, the fog twisted as if it had a surface, like a curtain moving gently from inside. I blinked. Nothing, just trees. But the hairs on my arms were standing up. I left the field and went back inside, leaving the stones behind. I couldn't take them with me. By the time I got my coffee, the mist had lifted, and the field looked normal again from the porch. Almost normal. I swear I could see the sunlight glinting off something faintly, as if the stones were still there, reflecting light that wasn't actually hitting them. I tried telling myself it was a dream, that the cold, the fog, and fatigue from the past week had made my brain play tricks. But that warmth, that vibration in my hand, it was too real, too physical, to be imagination. I spent the day trying to get work done, checking the field from the porch whenever I could. I avoided going out there until evening when the light changed, shadows stretching across the soil. Nothing moved. No stones. The soil was bare again, completely normal, except for a faint metallic scent in the air. I went to bed uneasy. I could hear the wind ruffling through the treetops outside the window, the faint sound of the creek nearby. I didn't see the stones again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Or maybe that the field itself was aware. Something had been there. Something that had left evidence I could feel and see, even if it disappeared by daylight. The next morning, I went back. No stones, no warmth, no hum, just my empty field and the usual dirt. I walked around, checking every inch, pressing my hands to the soil, expecting to feel the residual warmth. Nothing. I asked Frank again when I saw him. He laughed nervously, said he hadn't noticed anything. Maybe I'd left the heat of the coffee in my hand too long the night before. I didn't argue. I just nodded. Weeks went by. The field returned to normal. I harvested what was left of the corn stalks, tended to the goats, mowed the edges. But sometimes, in the early fog, when the wind is calm and the trees stand still, I swear I can feel that faint hum under my boots. And if I look carefully, I think I catch a glimpse of something bright and smooth at the edge of the field, just beyond the line where it stops. I've kept thinking about it, going over every logical explanation I can find. Frost, strange minerals, animal activity, pranksters. Nothing fits. The stones were real. They were warm. They vibrated. And for a moment, just for a moment, they made me feel like the world wasn't entirely the way I thought it was. Like there were things out there moving quietly, leaving traces, and watching. I haven't gone back at night since. I don't plan to. But when I pass by the field from the highway, sometimes I catch the sunlight glinting off something smooth in the morning mist. And I feel the memory of that warmth under my fingers, the low vibration, and I know that whatever left those stones, it wasn't gone. Not entirely. I was driving back from a late-night delivery run in my little Dodge Caravan, the roads outside Amarillo empty, flat, nothing for miles except the occasional fence line and the wind moving through the dry grass. It was close to midnight, a hot night for October, and the kind of dark that makes you feel like the world has stopped turning. I was tired, mind wandering between thoughts of my kids and the stack of bills waiting at home when the first weird thing happened. My radio cut out. Static, the kind you get when a station is weak, but then the sound changed. Not normal white noise. It was a faint, digital-sounding sequence, 5 notes, rising like a scale on a xylophone, clear and deliberate. Then it repeated. Exactly 3 times. Then nothing. Just silence, but the kind of silence that felt like it was waiting for something. I fiddled with the knobs, switched stations, turned the volume up and down. Every station went dead. No music, no talk, just the faint hum of the car, and that silence that felt thicker than it should. I shrugged and told myself it was some kind of interference, maybe from the power lines I'd been passing near. I kept driving. The road stretched on straight and flat, the headlights cutting through the black. The air smelled like dry dust and diesel, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Then I noticed the sky. I always pay attention to the stars when I drive late. It helps me stay awake. But tonight they seemed off. Not moving exactly, but pulsing subtly. I couldn't tell if it was my eyes, the heat, or the dark messing with me. I blinked, tried to focus, and the pattern disappeared. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Nothing unusual at first. Then I thought I saw a small light flicker in the distance, far off the road, hovering. It didn't move like a plane or helicopter. It was just there, a tiny point of brightness in the darkness. I blinked again. Gone. I shook my head, muttering under my breath. Just tired, I said aloud, though the sound of my own voice felt strange in the silence. I pulled off at the next rest stop, a little dirt pull-off with a faded sign that said Lakeview Rest Area, and killed the engine. The radio had gone completely dead, not even static this time. I leaned back, trying to process what I'd just heard and seen. That's when I noticed the smell. Not gasoline, not dust, not the usual night air. It was faint, like ozone, metallic and sharp. I got out of the car, walking around to see if anything nearby could be causing it. The grass was still and black under the headlights. No cars, no buildings, no signs of human presence. The smell lingered, and it made my skin prickle. I went back inside, closing the door, trying to shake the feeling. My eyes kept flicking to the tree line at the far end of the rest area, where the shadows pooled like ink. Something didn't feel right, like the world had paused in that moment. I kept hearing it, just faintly. The same 5-note sequence, almost under my breath, like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I started driving again, taking it slow. My headlights cut through the black, the wind off the plains now carrying that same faint metallic tang. Then I noticed the other lights, tiny, distant, scattered across the horizon, moving against the usual patterns. Not airplanes, not satellites. They shifted smoothly, almost deliberately, like they were pacing me. My heart rate picked up. I told myself to calm down. I was rational. It had to be something explainable. Electronics interference, maybe a prank, fatigue making my mind misread the shadows, but the notes had been real. I had heard them clearly. I sped up slightly, following the highway's faint glow. The lights in the distance kept pace, moving parallel with me, hovering, weaving slowly. I tried to signal, turning my high beams on and off. Nothing. No reaction. Just the faint, distant shimmer. Then, the weirdest thing happened. My digital clock blinked, 3:33 a.m., all 4 digits. I've had digital clocks glitch before, but this one wasn't on battery backup. It had been completely off the whole trip, running on the car's power. And the radio, it started again. Not the 5 ascending notes, but a low, humming tone, steady, almost like breathing. It was quiet at first, then louder, filling the cabin in a way that pressed against my chest. I pulled over to the shoulder, breathing hard. I reached for the radio, turning the dial, killing the ignition. The humming stopped instantly. Silence. The night returned. Only the wind and the smell of ozone lingered. I sat there for a while, trying to process it. The lights were gone, the pulsing sky had returned to normal, the field along the roadside just ordinary scrub and weeds. My hands were still shaking. I checked my phone. No signal. No reception for miles. I finally started driving again, slower this time. I tried to make sense of what had happened. The notes, the lights, the humming. I passed the same stretch of road I'd traveled an hour before, and that strange metallic smell returned for a moment, just enough to make me glance at the horizon. But again, nothing. By the time I reached my turnoff for home, everything had returned to normal. My radio worked. The night air smelled ordinary. The stars weren't pulsing anymore. I told myself it was over. I parked in my driveway, lights on, doors locked. My wife was asleep, the kids quiet, everything normal. The next morning I checked the car, everything fine. The radio was working, my phone charged normally. I even drove the same route later in daylight. No lights, no notes, no strange smells. The highway looked ordinary. But at night, sometimes, when I drive alone, I swear I hear it. The faint five-note sequence, just enough for my ears to catch it if I concentrate. And every time I glance at the horizon, even in broad daylight, I feel that weight in my chest, that metallic tang in the air, as if something had been there, following, waiting, leaving a trace just beyond reach. I haven't driven that highway alone since, not after midnight. I stick to routes near the city, lights, other cars, noise. I tell myself it was fatigue, a glitch, interference. But deep down, I know that night left something behind, something I can't touch, can't see, can't explain. And I don't think it's gone. I was walking through Maplewood Park later than usual that Friday night, somewhere around 11:30. The streetlights along the path cast the usual orange glow over the asphalt. But the deeper parts of the park were darker, the kind of dark that swallows shapes and depth. I usually like it, keeps me clear-headed. But that night felt different. There was this heaviness in the air, humid for late September, the kind that makes your skin feel sticky even when it's just a short walk. I had my earbuds in, music low, mostly just for background. The first thing I noticed was a faint flicker near the far edge of the field next to the path. At first I thought it was a reflection from the streetlight hitting something shiny, maybe a piece of trash or a reflective jacket left behind. But as I slowed down, the flicker solidified into this circular glow, pale white, soft, like a tiny lamp hovering an inch above the grass. I stopped and squinted. It wasn't big, maybe 6 inches across, but it had a presence I couldn't ignore. I took a step forward, and it moved. Just a little, in the same direction I was walking, keeping pace with me without a sound. My heart rate picked up, though I tried not to show it. Probably some kind of drone, I muttered under my breath, even though the air was still and I hadn't heard a thing that suggested motors or propellers. I slowed down even more. It drifted closer, maintaining its height above the grass, and I realized it wasn't hovering randomly. It was deliberately following me. Not aggressively, not threatening, just present. I tried taking a wide circle around it, going off the main path and closer to the trees. It adjusted, sliding along the edge of the field, staying just out of reach, perfectly keeping pace. By this point, I had taken my earbuds out. The park was unnervingly quiet. No crickets, no distant traffic, just the rustle of leaves when I shifted my weight. Every instinct in me said to run back to the lit path, but part of me was mesmerized, like I was being baited. I pulled out my phone to record it, just to have something tangible. As I aimed the camera, the glow pulsed faintly, brighter for a split second, then dimmed again. I tapped record. Nothing appeared on the screen. The glow didn't reflect, didn't change. It was almost like my phone wasn't even there. That, more than anything, made me pause. My hands were shaking slightly, but I held the phone up anyway. I started talking into it, my voice trembling. Okay, this is weird. The glow drifted a few inches to the left. My voice trailed off. I realized I couldn't hear it. Not a sound from it, not even a faint hum. Nothing, just the silence. I took a step closer, trying to get a better look. It mirrored me, moving in perfect rhythm with my step, always maintaining that hovering distance. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something about the way it moved wasn't natural, wasn't mechanical. There were no patterns, no obvious physics. It just existed. I thought about leaving, turning around and running back to my car, but I couldn't bring myself to do it immediately. I noticed then that the glow wasn't consistent. Sometimes it would pulse faintly, almost like it was breathing, or like the edges of it were alive, not fixed. I held my breath and leaned closer. The air around it felt heavier, warmer, though I knew that made no sense. There was no breeze, no current, nothing. Just this small, hovering circle of light. I tried a couple experiments. I walked in a zigzag, doubling back, slowing down, crouching down slightly. Every time it adjusted immediately, maintaining its distance, keeping pace exactly as if it were aware of my actions. The entire time I could feel this weird tension in my chest, like my own heartbeat had shifted tempo to match something outside myself. After a few minutes, or maybe 15, I wasn't keeping track, the glow started drifting upward, rising slightly above the grass, just enough to look untethered. I took a step backward, uncertain, and it stopped. Hovered at the same height for a moment, then began slowly drifting toward the center of the field, still pulsing faintly, almost casually. I took another step, half expecting it to follow, but it didn't. I exhaled slowly, telling myself I was overreacting, imagining things, whatever it was. I watched it hover in the distance, and I realized it didn't seem to have any edges, like the air around it was bending slightly. I blinked, and for a second, I thought it vanished. But it was still there, just more subtle now, faint like smoke in the moonlight. I decided to leave, kept my eyes on it, and retraced my steps toward the lit path. The glow stayed where it was, not moving now. I paused at the sidewalk, glanced back once, and it seemed smaller, farther away than it had been. I shook my head, muttered, "Yeah, okay, weird." By the time I reached my car, the night felt normal again. The crickets and distant traffic sounds had returned. The humidity didn't feel heavy anymore. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there for a few minutes, trying to process. I played the music back through the speakers, even started driving home, but I kept thinking about that little glowing circle hovering over the grass, keeping pace with me silently. Later that week, I walked the same path in daylight. Nothing unusual, just grass, trees, and the same benches. No trace of what I'd seen, no footprints, no debris, nothing to suggest that something had been there. I tried recording again, just to see if it would appear, but the phone worked fine, the grass was empty, everything normal. I told a friend about it later, someone skeptical. He said it was probably a drone or a reflection, maybe a trick of my tired eyes in low light. Maybe. But I keep thinking about the way it adjusted exactly with me, and the subtle pulse like it was aware of my presence. I don't go walking through Maplewood at night anymore. Not because I'm scared in the usual sense, but because I know something watched me that night. And I don't think it needed me to see it or to understand it. It was just there, waiting, patient, exactly where it wanted to be. And I wasn't entirely sure what it was. Even now, weeks later, when I drive past that field at dusk, I catch myself staring at the grass, expecting that faint glow to flicker. It hasn't, but sometimes I feel it in the corner of my vision, just enough to make me question what I thought I knew about that park, or about the quiet, empty nights that don't behave the way they should. I woke up to a faint vibration running through the mattress, the kind that makes your teeth feel a little loose before your brain really registers it. At first, I thought it was the neighbors again, their old HVC rattling or the fridge kicking on downstairs, but it kept going. Slow, steady, almost rhythmic. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and tried to focus. The clock read 2:17 a.m., the red numbers washing over the dim bedroom in the same boring glow I'd been half asleep with. I was alone. My roommate had been visiting his family this week, and the street outside was usually quiet at this hour. Still, that vibration felt wrong. Not like machinery. It was deeper, pressing through the frame of the bed, something almost alive in its rhythm. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. The air in my apartment felt thick, warmer than usual for early October. I padded over to the window and pulled back the curtain. That's when I noticed the sky. It wasn't dark, not in the usual way. It was just flat, gray, uniform. No stars, no moon, not even clouds, just this dull, empty light that didn't seem to come from anywhere. I leaned closer to the glass, trying to blink it into focus, but it didn't shift. My reflection in the window made me jump. I thought my eyes were playing tricks, but then the vibration stopped. Silence. My apartment felt too quiet, like all the usual night sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sirens, even the wind brushing through the trees, had gone somewhere else. I grabbed my phone to check the time and maybe get some normal light into the room, but the screen was dead, completely black. That was weird. It hadn't been dead before I went to sleep. I tapped it, charged it, nothing. Just like the sky, featureless and inert. I debated calling someone, but who do you call for a vibrating mattress and a gray sky? I decided to step outside for a better look. I dressed quickly, jeans, hoodie, shoes, and opened the door. The hallway was normal, lit by the dim exit signs, no unusual noises. But the moment I stepped into the stairwell, I felt the vibration again, faint beneath my feet, as if the whole building were humming. I made it to the street. The air was thick, humid in a way that didn't match the weather report. I could see the usual city lights, faint in the distance, but the sky above them was like a dull canopy, uniform gray, covering everything. Streetlights looked wrong against it, the way they should fade into darkness at this hour, but here they just hung in the haze. I walked down the block, careful not to draw attention. The vibration had stopped again, but I kept feeling it in the tips of my fingers, like static electricity under my skin. I passed the corner store, lights off, locked up. The street was empty, unusually empty, and I couldn't hear anything other than my own breathing and the distant hum of the city. Then I saw it. A light. Small, soft, hovering above the intersection a couple of blocks away. It wasn't moving the way a drone or helicopter would. It just stayed in place, like a reflection in water. I squinted. The gray sky behind it made it look unreal, like someone had painted it on. The light pulsed, not brightly but steadily, almost like it was breathing. I froze, trying to decide what to do. I wanted to run, call someone, but my phone was dead, and yelling would have been pointless. The light stayed, and then, almost imperceptibly, it began to move. Not across the street, not in any linear path, just closer. Closer without sound. I stumbled back, heart pounding. I could feel the hair on my arms stand up. Something about the way it moved wasn't mechanical, wasn't normal. I wanted to tell myself it was a reflection. Maybe a streetlight distorted by fog, but there was no fog, no mist, nothing in the air. Just that gray light filling the sky. I glanced around. No cars, no other people. Just the hum of the city in the distance and me. The vibration returned, stronger this time, under my feet, my chest, as if the ground itself were alive. I took a deep breath, tried to steady myself. Then it vanished. The light just disappeared, and the gray sky seemed to thin in places, almost like the air itself had shifted. The normal night sounds slowly started to creep back. The wind, distant sirens, the occasional dog bark. The vibration stopped completely. I blinked, checked the street, the empty intersection. Nothing. I ran back to the apartment, slammed the door behind me, locked it, and leaned against it, trying to process. My phone still wouldn't turn on, but the sky outside my window had returned to normal. The stars were faint, scattered, and the moon had risen just a sliver. Everything looked like it should, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had passed over, that I had been under it. I sat in my living room for the rest of the night, lights on, windows closed, listening. Nothing happened again. No vibration, no light, no gray sky. I even slept a little, though I woke several times, expecting that low, steady hum to start again. The next morning, I checked the news, weather reports, social feeds. Nothing. No reports of strange skies, no missing electronics, no odd weather phenomena. Just a normal night, ordinary city sounds, ordinary people going about their lives. I tried to rationalize it. A dream, a hallucination, some kind of local power line interference, maybe carbon monoxide or a migraine. But everything had felt real, solid. The vibration under my body, the uniform gray sky, the light hovering above the street, all of it. Weeks later, I still drive past that block lock sometimes, late at night. The street looks normal. The sky looks normal. But sometimes in my peripheral vision, I swear I catch a hint of that uniform gray, a shadow out of place, and the faint pulse under my feet. And just for a moment, everything feels off again, like the night could flip back to that other version at any second. I've stopped sleeping with the windows open, stopped leaving my phone on the bed. I still don't know what happened, if anyone else saw it or if it even matters. All I know is that night the world felt paused and I was awake in it. I was driving home on Highway 67, the stretch that runs through the National Forest between Echo Ridge and Cedar Gap. I left the job site in Durango later than I wanted, closer to midnight, and the highway was the kind of place where you could go half an hour without seeing another set of headlights. The sky had been gray all day, and by the time I hit the high pass, a low bank of clouds had rolled down over the ridge. It smelled like rain, though the forecast had only promised a few sprinkles. I had the truck on cruise and the heater on low. The radio was mostly static. Every station came in as fuzz and then drifted away. I remember thinking the static sounded like another layer of the night, a low, constant hush that matched the road. The headlights cut a tight cone through the gloom, and the pines leaned toward the asphalt like spectators. There were a few small things that felt off before anything really happened. First, the mile markers started repeating. Not numerically, they were the same sign twice in a row, mile 42 back to back, and then later, mile 41 showed up again where it hadn't been. I laughed at myself and blinked. Maybe the night had bent my sense of distance. Then my phone buzzed in the cup holder, and when I glanced down the screen said, "No service." That wasn't unusual up there, but right after that, the battery icon flickered from half to empty, and then settled back again. Little hiccups. Nothing you write home about. The road narrowed into a two-lane and the trees closed in. The cloud bank hung low, like someone had pulled a blanket down over the world. I passed the place where the road curves and overlooks the canyon. Usually you can see the faint glow of the river far below, but that night something else shone in the dark. At first I thought it was a reflective deer tag or a hunter's lantern, something small and close to the ground. I eased off the gas and killed the cruise. As I rounded the curve, my headlights caught it. A metallic shape hovering a little above the highway, maybe 12-15 feet up, dead center of the lane. It wasn't bright the way a spotlight is. It reflected the light back in a way that made it look almost silver blue, like polished metal under a cloudy sky. It didn't spin or make any obvious movement. It just stayed there, perfectly still, suspended over the painted line. My first sensible thought was construction. Some kind of sign or equipment I didn't notice. But the highway was empty of orange cones. There were no workers, no pickup trucks, no blinking hazard lights. The shape had no legs or mounts as far as I could see from the driver's seat. When I hit the brakes, the truck slid a little on the wet road and fog rose from the asphalt like breath. My heart picked up and the radio cut out completely, gone to silence. The only sound was the wipers tapping and the faint hiss of tires. I got out and stood in the rain-scented air, the truck idling behind me. Up close, the shape didn't look man-made in any conventional sense. It had smooth surfaces and subtle facets that caught the headlight beam, but there were no rivets or seams. It was maybe the size of a small car, and the surface looked like brushed aluminum. My breath fogged in front of me. There was a smell I couldn't place, faint and metallic like a camera flash or an electrical arc. I felt stupid standing there, jacket soaked through, and part of me expected some crew to jump out laughing. "Surprise, dude!" But the shoulder was empty, no footprints in the wet gravel. I fumbled for the phone, hands clumsy. The screen lit up, then stuttered out again. I hit the video button and the camera app stalled on a black frame for a second, then froze. I tried once more and the phone displayed the image, shaky, grainy. The metallic object looked back at me through the tiny screen, slightly distorted by glare, but I couldn't hold the autofocus steady. It felt like trying to look at a star through a telescope without a mount. I took a step toward it, fewer than 10 feet, I'd guess, and the thing rose. Not fast, not a sudden rocket-like blast. It lifted as if somebody had eased it up on invisible strings, maybe 3-4 feet, then paused. The pause felt like a held breath. I remember thinking about how quiet it was. No rotor chop, no fans, no mechanical whine at all. The trees didn't shiver. The wipers kept their rhythm. Nothing suggested propulsion. The cloud deck was low and ragged. When the metallic shape did move again, it rose smoothly, directly into that low cloud layer. My headlights hit it the whole time, and then, as it met the cloud, the reflective surface simply vanished. There was no streak of vapor, no trail, no smoke. In less than 6 seconds, it climbed out of sight into the gray belly of the cloud, and when my headlights swept the sky above the highway, there was nothing. The clouds were just clouds again, an unremarkable gray ceiling. I stood there in the wet and the static and the smell, feeling a mix of relief and a strangled kind of disappointment I didn't expect. I got back in the truck and the engine sounded normal. The radio came back on, fuzzing at first, then a station with a late-night DJ who was talking about garage doors and country music. I sat for a minute longer, hands gripping the wheel like that would ground me. My palms were damp, even though it wasn't very cold. I drove on, slow, keeping the beam low. The highway was as empty as before. I watched the cloud bank. It was thick and low, and if anything, I expected to see some oddness where the object had gone in, an imprint, a dimness against the cloud, but there was nothing. The smell faded as I drove away until I only noticed it when I rolled the window down at a stoplight. A mile or two further, the GPS blinked and said, "Recalculating," like it does when it loses a satellite. The display then jumped 2 minutes ahead. My watch, which I'd glanced at when I climbed back in, was correct. I make that drive a lot. I try to watch for deer and trucks and idiots with high beams. I kept thinking I'd catch some simple explanation, something ordinary enough to tell people at the diner the next morning, and it would sit on the table like a joke with a good punchline. But the next day, the highway crew said no reports of anything in that area, and the state trooper at the station shrugged when I described it. People say they see things on that ridge, he said, and wrote nothing down. In the weeks after, I told a few people, my sister, old coworkers, a guy at the bar who liked me because I had stories, and mostly what I got was polite curiosity, and then the conversation moved on. I checked the truck over the next week anyway. Mechanic did a full once-over. No damage, no signs of impact, everything normal. The one oddity was a faint smudge on the hood that looked like a fingerprint in oil. I wiped it off, and it left no residue. Sometimes at night now, when I'm on the phone with someone or just driving with the curve of my lane, the only thing I can see, I catch myself looking up at the clouds. They don't look different. They're just low and gray and boring. But I know what I saw. An object that sat in midair like it belonged there, that rose without a sound and went into the cloud like a thing returning home. I don't know why it was there or what it wanted, and I don't have a neat explanation to hand anyone. I just know I drove toward a metal sheen in the dark, watched it rise, and then watched the cloud close its mouth. I woke up because the ceiling was blue, not the soft yellow from my lamp or the streetlight that sometimes leaks in through the blinds. This was a flat, pale blue that filled the whole room like someone had hung a sheet of light over it. I blinked, trying to get my bearings. My phone said 2:06 a.m., but the screen was dim and stubborn. It took me a second to make out the numbers. The sound in the apartment was wrong, too. No radiator clank, no distant traffic rumble, just a quiet that felt thick. I lay there for a beat, half convinced I was still dreaming. I hadn't had more than 5 hours the night before. Between the late shift at the bakery and grading papers, I'd been running on fumes. But the blue didn't look like a dream. It had edges, a slightly pulsing quality at the corners where it met the wall, and when I shifted my head, I could see the light wash over the posters on the wall, making the ink look faintly luminous. I reached for my phone to check the time properly, and this is the thing. The second skin made contact with the glass, the blue dimmed. Not slowly. It was like someone turned a dial. The ceiling lost that full coverage wash and became plain white again, like it always was under the weak bulb. I smelled it then, a thin, sharp tang of ozone. Not the sweet, pleasant ozone after a summer storm, but a metallic snap that stuck in the back of my throat. I sat up faster, the mattress hissing a little as I shifted. My apartment was a second-floor walk-up in a quiet neighborhood north of Rochester. It had cheap insulation and the old single-pane windows that rattle in the wind, so I felt the silence the building launched back at me. The hallway light outside my door was off. The radiator clicked once and then didn't. The smell of ozone lingered, like something electrical had just been unplugged. Earlier that evening, a couple of small things had already pointed in weird directions. Around 9, the microwave had popped on for a second in the middle of a button press, and then gone dead. I had thought I hit the wrong setting, then thought nothing of it. At midnight, the neighbor's dog had barked for a long time, a single, sharp barking fit that cut off all at once, as if something had told it to stop. And sometime after 1 in the morning, my cheap digital alarm clock had blinked 12 on for 1 full minute, the numbers strobing like it wanted me to notice. I'd laughed at myself and gone back to bed. Now, standing in the half-light, I went through the apartment. I clicked the lamp on in the living room. It came up bright and normal. The kitchen light was fine. The coffee pot on the counter was off. Even the old VCR, yes, I own a VCR, don't judge, sat on the shelf like a lump of plastic, dead. The only thing I noticed was the leftover ozone smell, strongest in the bedroom and along the windowsill. I rubbed at my wrist like I could wipe it away. I turned the phone on, hard-pressed to the home button. It came awake, battery a hair above half like it always had been, but the camera app refused to open. I tapped it until my fingers went numb. The screen blinked and closed itself. I tried recording a voice memo instead. The microphone lit up, recorded my breath for 3 seconds, then saved as a file that played back like a scratched record. The sound stretched, a slow, underwater echo of my voice. I deleted it with shaking thumbs. I went to the window and pulled the blind aside. The street below was empty, the sodium lamps throwing those familiar yellow puddles. Up above, the sky was slate black, the usual field of stars gone. It wasn't cloudy. The low fog I sometimes woke to in winter would have diffused light from the street into something softer. This was a consistent gray-blue that seemed to sit over the whole block, the kind of color you get when you stand under an airport runway light. For a second, I thought there must be a construction crane or a police helicopter circling, but there was no sound. The air outside was still. I texted Joe, my friend from the shift who rode home with me a few nights a week, just to see if he was awake. No reply. I tried the building next door. The guy who fixes the pipes answered like nothing was wrong and asked if I needed anything. He sounded half asleep and didn't mention light or smell. The radio in my car, in the parking lot, should have picked up something from the local hospital or the highway transmissions. But when I went downstairs to check the dash, it was dead. The clock on the panel was dark. The car door opened with the same sticky sound in the cold. It was small, stupid things piling up into a pattern. The microwave, the dog, the clock, the dead car radio, and the door next to mine, apartment 2B, that I'd always left slightly ajar because Mrs. Krieger forgot her keys once. It was shut tight. I went back upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed with my feet flat on the floor. The ozone smell had faded to a ghost, but it would not quite leave. On the bathroom counter, the little travel toothbrush cup hummed faintly, if I laid my ear to it, like a radiator trying to remember its rhythm. I thought about calling the police or someone and decided against it. For one, who do you call for there was an odd blue light and a smell? For two, I didn't want someone thinking I was a weirdo. So I boiled this down to a small emergency plan. Get my keys, go to the car, drive to the all-night diner. Bright lights, people, coffee. Distance would feel normal. I slid on sneakers, palmed my keys, and opened the door. The hallway smelled of bleach and the building's usual dust. The blue was back then, but softer, a pale halo over the stairwell ceiling. It didn't come from any bulb or fixture. I told myself it was a reflection off a car or a neighbor's light. The rational part of my brain clicked through options like a checklist: power grid glitch, transformer, prank. None of them fit the total stillness of the air. Halfway down the stairs, the vibration started again, faint as a purr under my soles. Not the whole building this time, but a little thrum that reached up through the concrete and made the hair on the back of my neck lift. The bulb over the landing hummed a beat behind it and then steadied. I stood very still for a moment and counted my breaths. 1, 2. The thrum stopped. It was like the building holding its breath. Outside, the street looked normal, if a little dreamlike beneath that gray light. The diner was 3 blocks away. I walked fast. The night air smelled faintly like ozone and something else. Cut grass, I thought, though there was no grass in October. My phone buzzed finally, a text from Joe. He'd been asleep with his phone on Do Not Disturb and said to come over tomorrow. He asked if everything was okay. I typed back an honest but brief, "I think so," which felt cowardly and absurd. The diner was empty when I pushed through the door. The neon sign hummed, coffee burbled, and a couple of men watched a late game with the sound low. I sat at the counter, ordered black coffee, and watched the room hold together under ordinary light. It felt like a spell had been snapped. On the walk back, the blue was gone. The sky had its normal depth and the stars winked where they should. At my building, the landing light was just that, a landing light. And in my apartment, my phone resumed normal behavior. The camera opened without complaint. The voice memo recorded my voice crisp and whole. The ozone smell was gone, except when I pressed my palm to the windowsill and smelled a faint something like static. I didn't sleep well the rest of the night. Every creak made me sit straight up, every distant car a promise. When morning came, everything looked ordinary in the way morning has of rearranging puzzles so that you assume you were never looking at something odd in the first place. The clock on the microwave was correct. Mrs. Krieger knocked and said good morning and left with a bag of muffins. The dog across the street barked twice at the mail carrier. I told a few people about it in the days afterward. My sister laughed. and said I had a dramatic way of describing a blown transformer. My boss suggested stress. Even the city non-emergency line was polite and said no outages had been reported in my block overnight. But I kept checking my phone logs and the apartment's little motion sensor camera I'd installed in the hall after some packages went missing. The camera had a 3-minute gap in its overnight recording. Nothing, just black frames from 2:04 to 2:07 a.m. The log showed the file created and then corrupted, nothing more. The phone log showed a dropped attempt to launch the camera app at 2:06 that had vanished from the history. A week later, the weather turned. Snow came in hard and steady, and the neighborhood looked soft and knowable again. When I went out to shovel the walk, the air tasted clean and sharp, no faint ozone. When the dog screamed at apparently nothing in the late afternoon, we all laughed it off like neighbors do. Still, I kept a little cardboard box on the top shelf of my closet where I put my phone when I went to bed. It was absurd, and it made me feel like I was doing something. Every so often now, months later, I wake in the small hours and look at the ceiling just to make sure it isn't blue. Sometimes the room is an ordinary black, the way it's supposed to be. Sometimes I smell a trace of that metallic tang if I turn my head quickly enough after opening a window. And sometimes, on nights when the neighborhood is very quiet and my apartment seems too small to hold itself, I will press my thumb to the glass of the phone and watch the home screen glow. I keep thinking of that tiny pause, how the light dimmed the exact second my phone touched the screen. Whatever that night was, it left something small and precise in its wake, a gap in recording, a faint smell that lingers, and the memory of an ordinary ceiling made unusual. The motion alert buzzed my phone at 2:17 a.m., a soft chime I'd grown used to. The yard cameras pick up raccoons and cats at that hour, so I didn't jump right away. I rolled over, thumbed the screen, and the preview made me sit up. There was a silhouette crossing the lawn, a dark shape against the pool of light from the porch camera. It moved wrong, too fast, too smooth, and it was gone before the live stream loaded. The app showed me a single frame, a smear like someone dragged a shadow across the night. I hit play, and the clip snapped forward at normal speed. 1 second had passed on screen. In reality, I was still looking at my phone, trying to understand what I'd just seen. I live alone on a corner lot in a quiet part of town. The houses have decent yards, but nobody tends to be out after midnight. My cameras are cheap, 2 identical bullet cams wired to a little DVR in the garage. I bought them after a porch lighting incident last fall. Package thieves, local news, usual stuff. So I checked the feeds more than I probably should. The dogs didn't bark. The porch light stayed the warm yellow it always is. The recorded clip paused on the last frame and then skipped to the end. No rewind, no slow motion option, just 3 seconds of staticky blue and the app saying, "Clip unavailable." I tapped the notification again and again, like maybe the file would decide to reveal itself if I showed enough interest. I pulled on jeans and a hoodie and went out barefoot, phone in hand. The night air was humid and close. Summer's leftover heat sat on everything. The grass looked fine under the porch light. Even, dark, no stomp marks, no tracks. I walked the line where the silhouette had crossed, palm down on the lawn, feeling for anything off. The blades brushed my skin the same as always. Fresh dew, a beetle, a small mole run maybe, but nothing that said something had moved there in a rush. At 2:20, I tripped the other camera, the one aimed along the side of the house toward the alley, and it recorded a few seconds of nothing but the fence line and an empty trash can. A neighbor's sedan idled at the curb across the street. Someone in it was smoking. I waved. He raised a hand and then drove off. No lights on the street flicked weird. No police cars. I went back inside with that dry, small hollowness you get after the rush of finding nothing. Back at the DVR in the garage, I rewound the feed and watched the front cam frame by frame. When the motion alert triggered, the timestamp on the playback read 02:16:47. The file had 4 frames for that second. In frame 1, there was nothing. Frame 2 showed a dark blur over the path. Frame 3, blank digital noise. Frame 4, nothing. The clip that should have caught the motion was missing a middle, like someone had snipped out the core of it. The DVR log recorded motion event and a checksum error. I sat on the workbench under the garage bulb and tapped that error like it might talk. I thought of a deer. I thought of a person sprinting with a blanket. I thought of a delivery drone. They're quiet, they're fast, but nothing matched the angle and width of that smear. The smear was torso-shaped, vertical, not elongated like a fox or narrow like a raccoon. It moved with a flatness that made me think of a shadow projected on a screen. Which is to say, my brain kept stretching for familiar shapes and coming up with none. I called Maeve, my sister, who keeps a terrible hour and takes everything seriously. She answered on the second ring. I didn't tell her right away. I explained first that I had had an alert and that the feed flicked out. She listened and then said, "Rewatch it, frame by frame. Save what you can." Practical. Nice to have someone who says the obvious. I pulled the file and exported it to a thumb drive while she was on the line. The export process stalled at the same place the clip had, right at the motion event. Transfer failed. The file size froze for a second like the clock stuttering and then showed the rest of the file as normal. I went back outside to walk the perimeter with a flashlight. The beam skittered across the yard and the side bed, lit the oak trunks, and then snagged on the little ornamental stones near the back gate. For a second, the grass behind the stones seemed to gleam a different color, like oil on water. I crouched. The soil was dry, no crushed pieces, no embedded fur, no drag marks. My boots sank past where I'd walked an hour earlier and the impressions matched, my prints, my line, untouched. The house smelled faintly of something metallic inside when I went back in, like when someone burns a toaster briefly. I turned the oven light on for a moment because the smell was small and curious and then gone. The dog, I fostered a mutt named Gus, who's mostly asleep at this hour, was on the couch, snoring. He didn't twitch. The security system panel said all sensors normal, no door open. I replayed the clip with the volume up, headphones on. The feed gave me the hush of neighborhood night. Air conditioners cycling, a far dog, a car door. The motion event, the 3 frames in the middle, had this thin, high-frequency hiss across them, barely audible until I isolated it. When I amplified it, the hiss resolved into a rhythm, an almost Morse of sorts, a stuttered tapping at an irregular but repeating rate. It wasn't an animal's breathing, not footsteps. It felt manufactured, like circuitry trying to talk through noise. I sent a copy of the file to Maeve. She said it sounded like radio interference. I wanted to show her the lawn. I set the ground light to record continuous tonight, upped the sensitivity on the motion sensor a notch. If anything moved, I wanted every frame I could get. I made coffee and scrolled through neighborhood feeds on a forum I check sometimes. One post from 2 blocks over said someone's porch light kept flickering the night before. Another person had a picture of the sky with a band of weird haze. Coincidence, maybe. People notice the smallest things and tie them together into patterns because patterns comfort us. At 3:07 a.m., the phone buzzed again. Motion alert. I stumbled out in slippers, eyes raw. The camera had caught something else passing near the back fence, a pale line that ran parallel to the ground and then popped out of frame. It lasted less than half a second. I watched it on replay 5 times and then 20. The clips had identical properties, a sudden brightness, a smear, nothing else. The timestamps were exact to the second. Between the 2 recorded events, exactly 50 minutes had passed in real time. That felt recorded, like someone was doing this with intention and a clock. This time I left the porch light on full blast and walked the path with a heavier flashlight, looking for any crushed stems, any scuffed paint on the gate, a footprint. The grass where the camera showed motion was pristine. I walked the run with the beam inching along and felt silly and tired and watched. On the other side of the fence, a willow drooped. Its leaves were dry and unremarkable. My neighbor's window was dark. By dawn, I had 8 clips, 4 of which were corrupted at the same point, always during the motion, and 2 which showed nothing but a faint ghost smear. I spent the better part of the morning emailing footage to a guy at a local AV shop, the town's nerd who rebuilds ancient hi-fis, and he said he could do some analysis for a fee. He called back at lunch and used words like frame loss and temporal artifact, which meant less to me than I can't explain that one. When Maeve came over in the afternoon, she brought a thermos and a charger and a patient face. We walked the yard again. We reread the DVR log, compared times, checked the camera housings for tampering. There were no footpaths in the long grass, no piles of disturbed dirt, no scuff marks on the stones. I drove my truck's tire around the perimeter just to make a physical map of where people had and hadn't been, and the imprint showed only my own wheels and the neighbors from last week. We dropped flour on the back step as an offbeat test and left it overnight like some backyard ghost hunter's stereotype. In the morning, the flour was undisturbed, perfect smoothness like a mini lawn of powdered snow. I set up the old camcorder in the garage on a cheap tripod, pointed at the stretch of lawn the motion track suggested, and let it run. That camera is analog, makes tape, and for reasons I can't fully articulate, I trusted its hulking mechanical certainty more than the networked camera that spat out 3-frame mysteries. The camcorder ate a battery and dutifully recorded until 6 a.m., then croaked and stopped. I ran the tape and watched it back in the sunlight, convinced that witnessing in daylight would squash the after-midnight weirdness. The tape showed sunlight, my neighbor's fence, a squirrel, the play of wind through leaves, no smear, no silhouette, no sign anything had passed. I tried to sleep that night. My bed felt like a stage, and I kept imagining someone darting past the shutters in the middle of the night. Around midnight, Gus woke and paced, low whimper, and then thudded his head down on my knee and slept again. My phone chimed twice more with motion detected, and I stumbled out each time and saw nothing but the regular nocturnal smallness of the world. Weeks later, the AV guy sent a report. He pulled the corrupted frames into a hex editor, ran the audio through a bank of noise filters, and errored over the same anomalies I'd seen. He wrote that the corrupted segments looked like something: electromagnetic interference, a power sag, some external influence, had overwritten part of the recording buffer exactly at the moment of motion. He said buffer corruption in an impersonal tone, and then, hesitantly, it's as if the event itself interfered. Words are poor tools for feelings where nothing fits. I can say silhouette and show you the stills, and people will make their own sense. Drunk kids, bugs smeared on the lens, a friend up late. But when I stand under that same porch light at night now, the way the brown grass bends to nothing, I feel the weight of not knowing settle down like fog. The cameras keep doing their job. The DVR files build up in folders. Sometimes footage will corrupt in other ordinary ways. I've had a rainstorm do that, and I chalk those up as simple life. I kept the tape from the old camcorder in a box under the stairs, wrapped in a plastic bag that smelled faintly of attic sawdust. I replay it sometimes with the speakers low, just to look at the yard in the same slow frames that I know are real. The smear is gone from the tape. The yard is empty. The grass is untouched. I made a list of sensible things to do: replace the cameras, run conduit that are refastened junction boxes, swap the DVR, buy a new motion sensor. Each item is checked on and then undone, more for the motion of doing something than the hope of an explanation. The house is the same as before. Gus sleeps on the couch. The neighbor's sedan still idles occasionally at odd hours. Sometimes the porch light stutters when a delivery truck passes, and once in a while I hear a high, thin sound on the recorder that disappears when I speed it up. Sometimes, very late, when the hum of the refrigerator and the whale song on the old radio are the only things left, I open the DVR and watch that corrupted clip again. Frame 1, night. Frame 2, a dark smear. Frame 3, 3 frames of static. Frame 4, night. The file shows the timestamp, frozen there like a coin in time. I have the exported thumbnails and the hex dump and Maeve's patient questions. I have the lawn, perfect and unread, like a page without a sentence. I have the feeling of being watched that isn't watching at all, which is worse because it doesn't require an audience. I lock the back gate every night now, even though that felt ridiculous at first. I walk the perimeter. I leave the porch light on. The alerts still come sometimes, and I still get up for them. The silhouette never showed up on the old tape. The grass never bears any mark. The house carries on like a small, careful thing. That's where it sits. A handful of corrupted frames, a backyard that reads like a deniable alibi, and me sitting up in the dark, listening for the rustle that never comes. I woke up to a sound I couldn't place, a low, steady hum that went through the tent poles and into my teeth. I thought at first it was the campsite generator from the group at the next loop, but there was no light from their lanterns, nothing moving in the way a generator would show. The hum was patient and even, like someone had tuned a large string and let it vibrate without ever plucking it again. I pushed aside the fly and crawled out into the cold. The valley smelled like damp pine and a little camp smoke from where I'd left the fire dying. It was just past 3 in the morning. The stars were thin behind a wash of high clouds, and between the two peaks to the east, there was a bright white light, completely still, sitting low above the notch like a lighthouse someone had put on the ridge. It was too steady to be a headlamp, too pure to be moonglow. I blinked because my eyes were raw, and because blinking is what you do when you think something has to be wrong with your sight. When my eyes opened, the light was gone. I stood there, hoodie damp from the overnight chill, listening. The hum kept going, somehow louder in the hush. I stepped off the little knoll we'd camped on and into the narrow wash of the trail, boots sinking slightly in wet needles. The silence of the forest that night was weird. Not empty, but full of small, precise sounds. The creek farther down, a twig settling my breath. None of it matched the hum, which felt like it came from the whole world at once. I was alone on this trip. I took a week when the office's forecasting software required less babysitting and drove up from town. The plan was simple: hike, sleep in the tent, fish a couple of streams, read. I like being alone enough that my own thoughts become company. I wasn't worried about wild animals. I knew this park, and the rangers post warnings if black bear activity spikes, but nothing on the bulletin board said anything about strange noises. So standing there with the light gone and the hum filling the air, the sensible part of my brain did what it always did and started assembling ordinary causes. I checked the fire pit. Ashes, a few embers, nothing that could throw a spotlight to a notch 5 ridgelines over. I turned my headlamp on and swept the skyline. No helicopter rotors, no lightning. The clouds were thin and high. You could still see stars between them. The light, when it had been there, had been a perfect hard white, like an unblinking bulb hung in the sky. I thought about a reflexive camera flash from a trail hunter or a mirror catch from some overnighter's headlamp. Neither made sense. There was no pattern that suggested movement, no reflective glint on the birch bark below. I went back into the tent to grab my jacket. Halfway in, my cheap GPS watch chimed the hourly beep that warns you of the time. It read 3:06 a.m., and the screen froze for a full 5 seconds before flicking back to normal. The pause felt like an echo of the blinking light. Small, mechanical, oddly timed with the hum. Outside again, I walked the ridge in the direction of the notch until the trees thinned and the slope opened into the small clearing where the trail dropped toward the creek. From there I could really see the gap between the peaks. The white wasn't back, but the hum was clearer. It had a tone to it, not musical, not a single pitch, but layered, like someone had rolled several very low notes together. My chest vibrated a little with it when I stood still. When I moved, the prickle went away, which made me wonder if it was reacting to motion. I tried walking fast, and the thrum damped, slow, and it rose. It felt stupid to be thinking of it like a living thing, but that's what it did. It adjusted to me. I took out my phone and, almost as a reflex, opened the camera. The app took a second to wake up. The battery indicator had been 3/4 earlier. Now it was at 40%, and the phone said no signal. Not unusual up there. I tried to take a photo of the skyline just in case the light reappeared. The image came out grainy and flat, all gray and black. There was no flash of bright white, no artifact where the light had been. I recorded a short video of the ridge, and the sound came through on playback as a low mechanical rumble, but quieter than the hum I felt in my bones. The recording's timestamp jumped ahead by 30 seconds right in the middle of it. The video resumed like nothing had happened. I sat down on a fallen log and listened to the woods. The hum wasn't constant in the way of a fan or an engine. It had a pattern I couldn't quite catch. Swell, plateau, small dip, swell again. After a while, I noticed things I hadn't before. The small animals I usually hear chittering and scratching were absent. No squirrels racing across branches. No owls calling. Even the distant sound of a truck on the gravel road miles away seemed muted, as if the world had wrapped some part of itself in cotton. That absence of smaller, usual noises made the hum feel larger. I kept expecting movement in the notch, a flash, a figure, something. Instead, a thin vapor seemed to pass along the ridgeline like breath. Not fog. It was too sudden, too local. The light did not come back, but the trees along the skyline leaned as though responding to a wind that wasn't there. For a second, the trail behind me looked brighter, not from any physical light, but from the way the air changed. I blinked, and again, whatever that was had smoothed out. After a while, I started to walk back to the camp. The hum diminished the farther I moved away from the clearing, which made me more curious than afraid. I wanted to see if the effect was tied to the topography or to me being in the open. By the time I reached the tent, it was quieter but not gone. My sleeping bag felt oddly warm when I slid into it, like residual heat from a stove. I zipped up and lay listening, doing that math people do when they're trying to decide if leaving is a better option. Pack up now and drive out in the dark. Stay and wait for daylight. Another small oddity. The pocket lighter I kept in the vestibule of the tent, a common Bic, battered and stamped with some ski resort logo, had its plastic case slightly warm when I pulled it into my mitts. Nothing dramatic, but on a cool mountain night it was noticeable. I had the lighter in my hand when the hum rose again, this time with a clarity that made me tense. It was a closer, more direct sound, as if something had shifted position from between the peaks to somewhere nearer the valley rim. I unzipped and stuck my head out. The sky there between the peaks held no light, but the hum was a presence now, a low frequency that sat under the normal sound range and made the tent fabric tremble. I watched the trees roll on the ridge as if something heavy were moving above them. Not the kind of sweep a helicopter wakes, more like a slow ripple passing along the line of pines. Then a new sound, a single slender tone threaded through the hum, a high, almost electronic ping that repeated twice. It was so soft I might have imagined it if I hadn't heard it twice. When it came, the hum dropped into the low like a musical piece, making a minor shift. My stomach tightened. I thought about packing everything and heading down the trail in the dark, but something else held me. The tangle of curiosity and disbelief that builds pressure until you feel like a fool for not satisfying it. I crept out again and walked the little bridge over the creek where the water ran white and quick. The reflection on the surface showed the dark trees and the gray wash of clouds. For a moment, long enough to make me stop breathing, there it was. Not the bright white bulb on the ridge, but a thin band of light, vertical and steady, suspended above the tree line between the peaks. It nodded slightly, as if someone had put a lamp on a stand in the notch. I blinked. My first instinct was the reflex one, blink to clear your eyes. When I opened them, the band was gone. The creek gurgled, the clouds drifted. The hum was still there, patient, like a thing with its own timekeeping. I went back to the tent and lay with the sleeping pad under me and the hum in my teeth. I didn't sleep much. I kept waking, aware of the sound like a distant engine idling under a house. When dawn came, it was like the world had never shifted. Sun poured over the peaks, the notch was a notch, and the sky was a proper blue. Birds chased each other from pine to pine, the way they always do. The tent smelled of last night's coffee and the usual damp cotton. Nothing to suggest anything other than a night poorly slept. I packed my gear slower than usual, watching the ridge as if the light might simply reappear in plain daylight. When I passed the clearing, there were no tracks other than my own from walking the night before. No scorch marks, no crushed brush. Even the lighter that had felt warm now sat cold in my pocket. Back at the trailhead, the ranger who signed my permit asked if I'd seen any elk over the ridge. I told him no, and he nodded, folding the clipboard like he did for a million campers, not looking worried. He made a joke about weather making city people nervous and pointed the way to the road. On the drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror for the hum's equivalent. A glow, some sign, nothing. My phone caught signal an hour out of the park, and text came pouring in like I'd never been gone. When I told my brother about it later that day, he said, maybe the sky was doing that night thing people talk about. You know, lenses, atmospherics. He was a practical guy who liked measurable answers. Mine, by then, felt like a small private thing. A night that rearranged the usual facts temporarily and then set them all back in place. I thought about that hum over the next few weeks. about the way the world had quieted and the way the light had sat in the notch like something waiting to be noticed. Sometimes I'd be making dinner, and the memory of that steady, low sound would fill the room the way a remembered song will, sometimes. It didn't terrify me so much as it made places that had always been solid feel slightly uncertain. I started to sleep with the window cracked even in cold weather, as if a constant breeze might keep whatever it was from returning. I never found another explanation for that night. The ranger's log had nothing in it beyond the usual. A bear sighting 3 camps over, a fallen tree on Trail 5. My phone's video file from the night kept the timestamp jump, the tiny blank where the image had paused mid-hum and then resumed, but the pixels didn't hold any evidence of a lamp or a machine. Scientists, my brother suggested later, might have terms for atmospheric lenses or ionization pockets that create localized reflections. The park's public email had no alerts. All I had was the memory of the hum and the light framed between 2 peaks, and the odd way blinking made whatever had been there evaporate. I kept thinking of it like a small pocket in the world where a rule bent and then righted itself the second you acknowledged it. I went back to the park once more during late afternoon with another tent and a thermos of coffee, but the ridge there looked like it always did. Steep, green, indifferent. The notch was empty, just sky where I'd expected the impossible. When I got home and shuffled through my gear, I found the little Bic in my jacket pocket. It was room temperature, ordinary. I watched it roll under the lamp on my kitchen table and felt the memory of the hum at the base of my skull, patient and low, like something that had not been aimed at me, but had noticed me anyway. I was lying on the hood of my Jeep, looking straight up and thinking about nothing in particular, when one of the stars moved. I'd driven out past San Miguel that night because the sky out there is stupidly clear. No light dome from town, no low clouds, just the river of stars you get when you're far enough from asphalt. My buddy, Carlos, had given me the spot. A flat pullout off a dirt road, a low ridge to block the highway glow. I had a thermos of coffee, a blanket, and a cheap pair of binoculars. It was around 11:30. Cold enough that the coffee steamed in the cup, but not so cold I regretted being out. Before anything odd happened, the night was doing its usual quiet work. Crickets in the scrub, the distant, muffled rumble of a semi on a state route, the near constant hiss of my breath. I lay there on my back, binoculars tilted at the Milky Way, and ticked off constellations in my head the way I used to as a kid. Orion, a little lower than I remembered. Cassiopeia like a W. I could even pick out a satellite or two crawling along the edge of the sky. The first thing that made me frown was the radio. I had the little FM shoved under the dash on for company, nothing but static most of the time, and it started to pick up a voice, not music, not a station I knew. It was faint, a fast jumble of syllables I couldn't make sense of, like someone talking through a mouthful of ice. I tuned, caught a phrase that sounded almost like my name, then the signal collapsed back to hiss. I reset the dial and it was just static again. I shrugged. Signals do weird things in the desert sometimes. Reflections off terrain, somebody's CB picking up long distance. Then my dog, Maggie, who'd curled in the passenger seat and been asleep, sat up and stared toward the ridge. She didn't bark. She just watched, ears forward, the kind of intent animals get when the world rearranges. The hair on her neck stood up. A few seconds later, she laid back down like nothing had happened. That was the second odd thing. Small and unthreatening, but it made me more aware. You notice things more when you realize you'd missed a beat. A breeze came out of nowhere and dropped as quickly as it arrived, making the leaves on the mesquite whisper, then go still. The temperature dipped a notch that I could feel in my fingertips, not a big drop, just enough to make me pull the blanket tighter. I checked the screen of my phone. I'd put it on airplane mode to save battery, and since there was no signal anyway, and it registered the time wrong by 30 seconds. Little glitches. Nothing that demanded action. I lay back down and let my eyes find patterns. That's when I noticed a star that shouldn't have been where it was. At first, I thought it was my brain playing tricks. When you stare at the same spot for too long, the sky seems to breathe. But this was different. The star moved laterally, not the slow, predictable drift caused by Earth's rotation, but a shift against the background constellations. It slid maybe half a degree to the right, which doesn't sound like much until you're used to the sky being dead still. It didn't brighten or color change. It just changed position in a way that didn't match anything I know about orbital mechanics. I sat up on my elbows. The rest of the sky stayed perfectly still. Orion was where Orion should be. The dim smudge of the Andromeda Galaxy was unmoving and polite. Only this one point of light had shifted. I blinked hard, looked again with the binoculars. The star, if it was a star, was now in a place that made no sense. It kept moving, smoothly, like someone nudging a pin on a map. I'll admit I laughed out loud in a tiny, embarrassed way. There's a long list of things people see out here that turn out to be normal once you check. Satellites, aircraft, reflections, meteor trails. But this didn't match. The star moved for maybe 3 seconds in total, slow enough to see it slide, but fast enough that it felt like watching someone lift an object and place it down on the tabletop. Then, as if it had remembered where it belonged, it snapped back, like someone pressed a key. Click, back in place. When it snapped, my stomach dropped in this small, stunned way. Not terror, just the immediate dissonance of the world not following its rules for a heartbeat. I reached for my phone to record the patch of sky. The camera app stuttered on launch the way it had earlier by my watch. I fumbled and finally got footage, but when I played it back, there was a blank half second where the star had moved. The rest of the clip was normal. No artifact, no blur except that hole. I checked the timestamp. It showed exactly when I'd seen it. The file compression had eaten the middle of the event. I tried to describe it to myself in technical terms. Lens flare, atmospheric refraction. I thought about plane lights reflecting off high cloud. The sky above me was a sheet of black with pinpricks. There were no clouds. If anything, an aircraft would leave a streak or blink. This slid. It allowed no simple explanation. I sat up. The coffee had gone tepid hours ago. My hands smelled faintly of it. The radio chirped again, and this time I heard real words. A cadence like a voice speaking too fast. North, north. Then nothing. The signal dropped like someone had gone out of range. Maggie stirred and put her head on my knee, eyes half closed, like she'd been pretending to sleep. I walked a little toward the ridge to get a better angle. The desert around the pullout was a flat bowl, a small scrub, and the washed-out tire tracks of other folks who'd come for the dark. Ahead, the land fell away to a black gorge where I could hear the faint, pure sound of the river if I concentrated. As I stepped, my headlamp clicked on. Not mine. I hadn't turned it. I fumbled to switch it off. The battery indicator showed full, but when I checked the device, it was damp along the rim. Probably condensation, I told myself. The hair on my arms was prickling again. I tried to be methodical. I scanned the horizon with binoculars. I checked the GPS watch. It took a long time to get a fix. The automatic setting on my dashboard chose an AM station instead of the FM static and carried a cowboy song for a minute before collapsing again into hiss. These little failures are like dominoes. You don't notice one, but a bunch together make a pattern you can't ignore. Another second strange thing. Off to the east, near the river, a small grid of white dots blinked in unison, maybe a dozen of them, then dimmed and vanished. Not a firefly pattern, not animals. They were neat, deliberate, like light bulbs switched on at once and then off. The sound of the night shrank. Less insect noise, fewer distant car tires, like the world had pulled its volume down. I stayed until the sky began to thin at horizon, gray light crawling like a slow tide. When the bright band of dawn started, everything looked like it always had. The star that had moved was back in its place, painfully ordinary. The radio worked. My phone battery read 62% as if nothing had happened. The binoculars were fogged on the inside rim where I'd breathed a little too hard. I packed the gear and drove back to town with no plan. Only this feeling of having seen something that hadn't wanted me to keep watching. For the next week, I told the story to anyone who'd listen. Half laughing, half serious. Carlos shrugged and said maybe it was an unusual satellite, maybe a test. My sister asked if I'd had anything to drink, which was funny. I drink coffee on these trips because I'm too old for anything else. I checked star charts online and amateur astronomy boards until my head hurt. People offered me comets, rare atmospheric phenomena, military equipment. None of the answers lined up cleanly. A month later, I went back. Same pullout, same thermos, same blanket. The desert was as patient as ever. I sat under the Milky Way like an old habit and watched, thinking maybe repetition would teach me how it had happened. For a long time, nothing odd happened. The stars moved their usual slow arc. Satellites drew thin lines. An owl called from the wash. I thought the episode had been personal. That was the worst part, being the only witness to something that folded back into normal. Then, maybe near midnight, I noticed a tiny shift in the sky's texture. Nothing like a star moving now, just a subtle shimmer, like heat over asphalt. It lasted a breath and then smoothed out. I felt the prickle of a tension in my skin and realized I still wanted answers, even if the answers were only to know I hadn't gone entirely mad that first night. I packed up and left when the sky went gray. On the dirt road back toward town, the Jeep's headlights picked up the shape of a billboard with a faded ad. The light from it was warm and steady. For a moment, for a stupid heartbeat, I expected it to slide a few inches to the left like that star had. It didn't. I don't have any tidy explanation. I don't know whether some small patch of sky decided to test the rules or whether my mind caught a fluke both physical and unremarkable. What I have is the memory of that one bright pin moving like a thing with intent, the coffee cooling in the thermos, the way time goes back to ordinary, and the strange quiet after it snapped back. I still go out sometimes because the sky is right there, and because if something odd happens again, I want to be paying attention. I was staying at a little roadside place off Route 93 in southern Nevada, just outside of Caliente. It was late March, still cool at night, but warm enough during the day that I'd leave the window cracked open a bit. I'd been there 3 nights already, working on a freelance piece for a small regional paper about rural tourism. Basically a fluff piece about ghost towns and desert hiking trails. The night before everything happened, I saw something strange out in the desert sky. I wasn't even looking for it. I was sitting on one of those plastic chairs outside my room, having a cigarette, just killing time before bed. It was maybe 10:30 p.m. The sky was clear, no wind, just that huge quiet stillness you only get out there. I noticed what I thought was a plane at first. Bright white light, steady, moving slow. But after a few seconds, I realized it wasn't moving like anything I'd seen before. It would stop, hover, then drift side to side. Then it made a perfect right-angle turn, no arc, no curve, just a sharp angle like someone dragging a cursor on a screen. I watched it for maybe a full minute, then it blinked out, not like it faded or flew away, just gone. The next morning, I mentioned it when I was grabbing coffee in the motel lobby. The manager, this older woman named Marcy, laughed and said, "People around here see things all the time." I wasn't trying to make a big deal out of it, I just thought it was weird. But later, when I was writing up notes for my article, I decided to send a short message to the Lincoln County Sentinel, just a local blurb. Strange light observed over Highway 93 Tuesday night. That kind of thing. I sent it around noon. At 3:07 a.m., someone knocked on my door. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. 3 knocks, a pause, then another 3. I remember that because, as I thought, it might have been Marcy checking on something, though that didn't really make sense. I checked the time on my phone, then got up. When I looked through the peephole, 2 men were standing there. Both were wearing black suits, white shirts, black ties. Not tuxedo formal, just very clean, very deliberate. Their clothes looked new. Their shoes too, like straight out of the box. They weren't dusty, which stood out because everything gets dusty there. One was slightly taller, maybe by an inch, but they looked almost identical. Same pale skin, same narrow faces, same dark hair cut too short to tell the style. The taller one smiled when he saw me looking. It wasn't a friendly smile, it looked like someone imitating one. I cracked the door open just a few inches, keeping the chain on. "Mr. Hayes?" the taller one said. His voice was calm but flat, like a customer service rep reading off a script. I told him, "Yeah, that was me. We're sorry to disturb you so early," he said. "We'd like to ask you some brief questions about a sighting you reported." It took me a second to realize what he meant. "You mean the light thing?" "Yes," he said, nodding once. "Please describe again what you observed." I remember thinking it was weird he said observed instead of saw. I started explaining. White light, strange movement, vanished suddenly. They both listened, standing perfectly still. Then the shorter one interrupted me. How long did it look at you? That threw me off. I didn't say it looked at me, I said. He blinked once, slow. You said you were watched. I hadn't said that. I told them no, I just saw a light. They both turned their heads toward each other at exactly the same time, like they were syncing. Then the taller one asked, have you experienced any unusual fatigue since then? I said no, why? He didn't answer. He just smiled again, that same wrong smile. The shorter one asked if I'd taken any photos or video. I said no, I hadn't even thought to. Good, he said. That's good. Then they both thanked me in unison, literally, same words, same rhythm, and turned to leave. I shut the door, locked it, and just stood there for a minute trying to process it. I looked